Reminder to the committee members and to those testifying, hold that mic in real close because we're having a hard time catching you on the live stream. And the purpose of the live stream is so that folks that are watching from a distance can listen to what you're saying and be part of the conversation. So please speak directly into the mic, Senator Nethercott. Thank you.
And committee members, make sure you do grab a microphone when you're speaking and get close to it. So with that, let's call the meeting back to order and get right to the agenda. Sorry to be a little bit late back. Next, for consideration this afternoon, county permanent reserve funds. Anyone who would like to come forward and tell us what we're talking about? I had a hunch.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I'm Jeremiah Raymond here on behalf of the Wyoming County Commissioners Association and your 23 county commissions. Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to introduce the topic as I know it, but this comes from Representative Clausen, so perhaps it's better addressed by him, and then I can speak to the county position on this.
Representative Clausen, would you like to join Mr. Raymond out here, or would you like to throw your, whatever you have any introductory remarks would you like to share with us?
I can.
Okay. Representative, how about if we take it that direction, then Mr. Raymond first, we will come back to you. How about that? Okay, Representative, it's all yours.
All right, so I brought this interim topic. What it amounts to is that in looking in the last 2 years with our fall off in commodities in my first year as legislator, the collapse in some of our minerals revenues, and then in general, most generally my home county, but it happened all over the state, huge dips and rises in not only sales tax, but tax revenue in general. Copperas County is probably the poster child of this. And 2 years ago, I think we were 65% fall off. This year, we're 75% up. Huge dips and valleys in revenue. And what it seemed to me is there was maybe a tool missing that the state had, the counties didn't have. And that was an account kind of based generally on the, like, similar to the Permanent Mineral Trust Fund, where not just excess taxes, but say you could vote in your 1% sales tax, or maybe some of your lodging tax if you're in a county that has dips and valleys with lodging tax, safety county. And then make it kind of a split baby, if you will, with revenue generators. And then put spending policy on this similar to the Permanent Mineral Trust Fund, where you could take a 5%, make it fairly easy for county commissioners to take up to 5%, say 2.5% spending policy by majority commissioners, 5% by unanimous, and then find a way to, and then these numbers are random, or not random, but find a way to take it all the way up to a 20% spending policy, a 5-year burn rate on this account. So you could get rid of some of these peaks and valleys, long term, not necessarily short term, and then use the reserves for the income off of this for long term projects. Instead of, right now, our only options, I guess, with one sense, is build buildings and that sort of thing, and it we just basically place another tool up there for county.
Thank you, Representative. Anything, committee, any questions of our colleague, Copperas County? Raymond, maybe you've got some things you'd like to add to that?
Sure. Mr. Chairman, again, Jeremiah Raymond of the County Commissioners Association. We certainly appreciate Representative Clausen bringing forward a conversation about the opportunity for more tools in the toolbox. I did provide you a handout that has county reserve accounts across the top of it. I wanted to, there are a couple of public tools, and this document shows those two public tools for the Treasurer's Office, and then there are other private tools that the counties have available to them, or school districts and many other public institutions have available to them to manage those reserves that they may have. the document that you have, again, shows WyoStar, which is the short-term fund that was put in place by the legislature in 1987, which allows for commingling of investment funds and a sharing of the interest based on the earnings that are realized in that account. And then an important component of both this and WyoStar 2, which is the long-term approach, is the ability to withdraw funds without penalty. And I do have WyoStar 2, that's the long-term approach. They're largely set up the same, but there are minimums for investment in the WyoStar 2 program, and you have to stay in that program for a minimum of 3 months. But again, you can pull out funds without penalty. On the back, I just gave what the Treasurer's Office reported as the rate history on those two programs. You see that they are generally a little bit better, quite a bit better perhaps than you might receive through a bank or a CD or some other mechanism. When I took this topic to my members, what I heard is that they feel they have, in relationship to the reserve accounts, they feel they have put in place a number of mechanisms to do exactly what Representative Clausen mentioned. In fact, Campbell County has put in place a resolution that prevents or only allows for the use of interest income off of their their reserve account. Yeah, almost said permanent, but it's not a permanent. Of their reserve account for government operations, whether that be maintenance of facilities, building of facilities, other governmental activities. What I did here is an interest from the commissioners in discussing are there other variable ways to increase the rates of returns on their accounts for those that have them so that they can provide that back, but doing it in such a way that it provides for that higher rate of return, but also maintains the fiscal integrity and fiduciary responsibility that they have in managing those funds. But again, Mr. Chairman, the commissioners are here to be a productive participant in the conversation, and if the body wants to move forward a conversation around permanent reserve accounts, they are willing to engage in that conversation.
Do you have any comment, Brett, in your conversations with other county commissioners, Mr. Riemann, regarding what might be a beneficial framework for what we're talking about here? What,
Mr. Chairman,
other than just a way to invest in more return?
at this point, they all indicated they felt they had sufficient tools to be able to manage those reserves that they had. They didn't express that they felt they needed a permanent reserve account, not to express that they're against having that conversation, but they didn't feel that that was something that they needed at this point in time.
Anything? Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, the question I had is, are there some things in the way we do business otherwise, and I'm thinking primarily of getting aid from the slip board and people like that, where you're required to spend these reserve funds down in order to get the state aid. Are there any laws or procedures that way that are an obstacle to the county accumulating a true rainy day fund that could be used even out some of these swings that we do get in our revenue? Because I know in the past that has been a problem, Mr. Chairman. I don't know what the current status is.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not aware of any statutory, Senator Scott, I'm not aware of any statutory provisions that do exactly that. But with the conversation that I did have with the commissioners, they felt they were trying to put in place the prescriptions that would prevent, one, abuse of the funds, and two, ensure that it was responsibly maintained over time such that it could provide for services. I also heard a conversation about the fact that the counties are not unlike the state, and the fact that we have large swings occasionally, and that's when you invest in your community. But I had, the conversation I had in particular was Converse County is ensuring that you set aside the appropriate funds to maintain those facilities over time is an appropriate approach. And I know Campbell County's done that with the rec center and ensuring that there's a 50-year fund to maintain and operate that facility. And certainly maybe that's a tool we need to have more readily available in some of the counties.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Freeman. Any other questions? Is there any public comment on county reserve accounts? Any public comment? Please come forward. Thank you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Joan Evans. I am a first vice president with George K. Bauman Company. We do public finance in the state of Wyoming. We also serve as the distribution agent for a fund called the Wyoming Government Investment Fund. As you heard Mr. Riemann explain the terms and the rates and the program of WyoStar, that fund is administered by the state treasurer's office. The Wyoming Government Investment Fund is sponsored by the Wyoming School Boards Association and the Wyoming Association of Municipalities, and was created by the legislative body in 1996 for the same purpose as Mr. Riemann described the WyoStar Fund, to allow Wyoming municipal entities to commingle their funds to earn a higher rate of interest. So just as a side note, whereas Mr. Riemann was saying the county commissioners were expressing they felt they had the tools, we do have all 23 counties participating in the Wyoming Government Investment Fund, and oftentimes they will participate in that fund as well as WyoStar as well, depending on the rates. And the purpose of the fund is really to help them manage their short-term cash flow, so we're talking about a year or less. But oftentimes entities with larger amounts of reserves can go out and have those funds individually managed by the fund manager, and we do have a couple of entities who participate in that way. And that way their funds can be managed strategically differently than the pool to help them earn even a higher rate of interest based on their investment policy. So I just wanted to make the committee aware and just tag on to what Mr. Riemann was saying about the tools in the toolbox that are available for all Wyoming municipal and political entities, including counties.
Any questions for Ms. Evans? Questions? Senator Schumer?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wondered what your rate of return in comparison to WyoStar, you guys done basically the last few years.
Ms. Evans?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Schuler, the rate has varied over time depending on the investment strategy of the fund. For a period of time, let's say 4 years ago, WGIF was lagging behind WyoStar a bit, and in the last year, as rates have gone up, WGIF takes a little bit more of a short strategy on investing, so when rates go up, it can see an increase in the rate, and so we've been a little bit higher than WyoStar over the past maybe 6 months or so. The fixed term program that is available through the Wyoming Government Investment Fund differs from WyoStar 2 in that WyoStar tool is fixed term, but it is still a pool. And the fixed term side of WGIF is actually CDs purchased in a bank in that entity's name that are FDIC insured. And so they pick the term and they use the CD just like, you would as an individual. So the fixed term side of it is a little bit different.
Okay. Anything else, please? Ms. Evans, thank you.
Thank you very much.
See you. Thank you. Is there any other public comment on county reserve accounts, county reserve funds? Okay, we will close public testimony committee. What is your pleasure, if any, regarding the representative's thoughts today? Representative, I wonder if you might consider working with LSO and drafting what you think might be something, and then bringing it back to us so that we can take a look at it. And it might be at that time that the committee would like to join in your effort, or at the very least, be aware of it and be ready, willing, and able, hopefully, to support your efforts. Does that sound like something? Okay. Moving on. It's time for lunch. So we're ready for surface water drainage. We're continuing with some local issues. And Mayor, good to see you. Representative Sweeney, it's good to have you here this afternoon. Thank you for being here. Surface water drainage systems.
My favorite topic.
One more time.
Love it. Easy.
I've never heard of this idea.
You're great. Representative, you bring such love when you come to the table. So, good afternoon. I'm a little winded. I went to the oil and gas commission. Not a problem. So, should I apply to 2 places of steps? So anyway, thank you, Rick. So anyway, we were glad to see that this did make it back as far as a priority for the interim. But we, after discussing and recussing and different versions, we're going to try to simplify it a little further, and we have a number of people here to speak, and we have just a real rough draft of some legislation that I don't know if we've hopefully provided copies. But I'll first start off. We would have been a little bit further. Senator Kinski had been working with Chris Land at the LSO office, and Chris evidently, as of midweek last week, resigned. And so we're not quite sure exactly. Representative, I appreciate you bringing that up. I was disappointed. I did reach out to Senator Kinski, and he was unable to get back to me before this meeting. I haven't heard, so I do know that he had some suggestions, concerns about the bill that came forward. It made it out of the House and over to the Senate. So I cannot represent exactly where the senator might have an idea for this to go, but do you have a sense of that?
I do. It did, Mr. Chairman, thank you. It did make it out of the Senate, but kind of
So it was the
failed
other way,
in.
other way around.
Yeah, that was
What you got?
my house.
Thanks for refreshing my memory.
Not as in Hammer is the Senate.
So we took care of it.
Yeah,
And, okay.
you might say that
Something happened. Okay.
something is. Thank you.
I'm sorry.
So I will read a couple of quotes that the Casper City Attorney John Hanley, who had worked on previous versions, was in contact with Senator Kinski. And I'll just read a couple of things. In his approach, and what you'll see is what we're asking for is get rid of Senate File 20 and start with a new bill that would be modification into
Title 15, which more deals directly with or Title 15, Chapter 7, dealing with the enterprise funds and account directly. As Senator Kinski wrote in an email last Friday to our city attorney here in Casper, this enterprise fund approach seems intuitive. There is authority to take water from the stream, clean it up, and feed it into a drinking water system that is your water utility. There is authority once that water is used to clean it up and put it back into the stream. That is your sewer utility. He goes on to say back in the day, that was enough, and towns' runoff from watering lawns and parks from street cleaners in storms simply ran back untreated into the creek or river. Or as happened in Sheridan's original downtown sewer or stormwater was dumped into the sanitary sewer system as a convenience because they had no other way to divert the stormwater out of downtown. So the untreated surface runoff causes clean water issues in general and for everyone downstream. So that's his version, and that's the direction we've headed with this new language, is just to try to clarify, not monkey with existing statutes as far as bonding, but to add some language to include the stormwater provision as it's already prescribed in state statute for sanitary sewer and clean water.
Representative, that portion of the statute, that's a fairly extensive list, is it not? I don't have it in front of me, but.
Well, and I definitely not an attorney, but it is fairly extensive on what it covers. And again, to Senator Kinski's thoughts is he believed that municipalities already had some of this authority. But as we've seen over time with this legislation, we've had attorneys, both from the LSO and others, say that's not the case. So we believe this approach will better outline that and get it in, make it perfectly clear to everybody what that is. If I might, I just wanted to add that away from Senator Kinski's comments, direct comments, that changing the state statute to fit social demands and government needs. There's a history of polluted streams and rivers throughout the country that's made society realize that they can no longer dump waste into those waterways and have clean water to drink. Society has evolved to the point that stormwater needs to be treated to handle diverted or filtered. In addition to preventing pollution, government has a responsibility to prevent flooding when possible. Flooding can be small and localized or much larger, but whether the flooding isolates only a portion of a city or a town or causes widespread havoc, including human injury and death, as we've seen in Cheyenne, consequences are usually local, and it is the local first responders who must respond to the consequences or who are stopped or delayed in responding to flooding and other ongoing emergencies. Stormwater systems are an important component of municipal infrastructure and public safety, and in some cities more than others. These are local questions, and by statute, we have assigned to our municipalities the responsibility for public safety within their boundaries. Unlike the private sector, who can drop an unprofitable product line, towns and cities do not have that option. For example, of simply abandoning neighborhoods, not sending police out, stopping snow plowing, or tearing out streets in order to reduce costs. Yet towns and cities are being asked to provide critical services, particularly with stormwater systems operation and management, without adequate funding. Casper, as an example, but not the only, certainly not the only example, has over 35 million of needed stormwater infrastructure improvements. And this is based on an additional 50 million down the line over a 20-25 year period. So what we're asking for is to take a new look, get out of your minds, Senate File 20 for my House colleagues, and put together a different approach that the cities and towns can work with. And with that, there's some mayors here and other folks that know a heck of a lot more in their boots on the ground. And our new executive director, me, I thought it was Carter that was sitting up here again. So,
Well, thanks for running up the stairs, Representative. We appreciate you being here and a little exercise to boot, so.
Yeah. Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Representative, I really appreciate the presentation and thinking outside the box in this regard. So, a lot of these municipalities, I would argue most of them, have surface water drainage in place as it stands right now. And so I understand what you're saying about maybe the need to amend Title 15, but what other authority would they have built surface water drainage besides Title 15 beforehand? Because the way I read, and the reason I bring this up is I read Title 15 to cover surface water drainage. The way it reads, it says for waterworks. I don't believe waterworks precludes surface or water drainage, or at least in my opinion. But as he stated, there were some attorneys that said maybe, maybe not. Has there ever been any official rulings, or did we get an opinion from the AG's office on that?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Lindholm, I do not know if there ever was an Attorney General's opinion on that. It just had seemed that it just wasn't covered, in particular in reading other portions of other statutes, that it wasn't included. And so this would definitely clarify it if we simply added onto their surface water. And it still leaves in place, bonding authority if you had major new development, whether, the situations, as Cheyenne seems to continue to grow in different portions of the city, up by the college, in different areas. This would basically give them another mechanism without indebting the citizens through bonds.
Anything else? Representative, thank you. I'd love to hear from others on this issue, including our new director. Mr. Frazier, I'd like to add to this, we would appreciate it, and others might want to come forward after that.
Yes, thank you. And we do have several members here, including a handful of mayors that are in the room. I want to thank Representative Sweeney for the record, David Frazier, Executive Director, Wyoming Association of Municipalities. I want to thank Representative Sweeney for his remarks and his work on this, and frankly, he covered it quite well. So I couldn't add a lot without being redundant, other than to say just a couple of things. Number one is part of the reason I'm here is so that you'll know that this is an important issue, not just to the constituents that Representative Sweeney represents, but to all our communities in the state large and small. And it is, it's gotten more, managing that surface water runoff has become more complex as we've built and created new impervious surfaces and so forth. Only exacerbates the existing problems that we created, that our forefathers created when they settled most of these communities next to rivers and put the city right in the pathway of natural drainage system. So we have that to deal with as well as the new drainage issues that we've created just through our own development as well. I really like and I guess I should say we have the organization we like, this simpler approach. Again, as the co-chair said, could be argued that this authority already exists, and some are arguing that. I think the reason that the legislative clarification would be good is so that we don't have to enter that argument, as it were, so that it's clear what our authority is, and with that, I would also point out that by including this in Title 15, it also then makes it subject to all of the public hearing requirements, so forth, of the enterprise fund statutes. So, we're not asking you to give, staff and, the option of just putting this into place. What we're talking about is a deliberative decision by the governing body in open session, and typically with at least 3 readings to take care of that, and of course, take your citizens into response. With that, I think I would take any questions or defer to some of the elected officials that are here with us.
I appreciate that. Any questions, committee?
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Reddick.
Thank you, if I may. So can everyone hear me okay? I heard that my mic maybe wasn't loud enough with my mic before, so. Just let me know if I start getting quiet. I appreciate that. Again, I appreciate the comments of Representative Sweeney. It's great to see you here again advocating for this issue. Just want to remind the committee and some of the new committee members, this has been the 3rd year, I think, at least that I can recall, of us seeing and hearing from these issues from our cities and towns. And so I do believe it's time for us to solve it this legislative session. You have heard some of the issues associated with different attorneys' interpretations regarding legislative authority for cities and towns to already address this issue in statute. When that happens, lawyers call that ambiguity in the law. And courts usually end up having to decide what those ambiguities actually mean. Usually with a footnote to the legislature to go make the law less ambiguous, make it unequivocal. And so with that, even though there are different legal interpretations associated with these statutes and where this should fit, I believe it is our job now, having determined ourselves that it is ambiguous based on competing legal interpretations, to get this solved. And so I'd ask this committee to listen carefully to the concerns from your cities and towns. They want to solve the issue, surface water, stormwater drainage. That's a good thing for them to do, and something that we need to support to make sure they have the right tools available in order to make sure our cities and towns are protected in this capacity. So with that, I would ask the committee to not continue to kick this down for future years and seeing it year after year after year to actually solve this, like the good Senate did.
Other thoughts, Representative Bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a quick clarification question. If we were to go forward with this, wouldn't this currently practice, according to the 10 different emails that I received on this issue from my governing body, from my local small community of a county of 15,000 people, but Torrington being 6,000 and Lingle being 500 and Yoder being 200. It's a big issue. Every year we have the 100-year flood practically every other year. So we have this issue constantly. The sewer issue is they're constantly having to use their maintenance is having to clean out leaves and issues out of the drains and stuff. And so they're having to take these funds and borrow from other accounts because they're not dedicated for this issue. So wouldn't my question is, wouldn't cleaning up this, this issue with our legislation, wouldn't that be in the best interests of all of our citizens and all of our communities by having more transparency on how we're spending our funds?
Treasurer, would you like to address that on behalf of all of your representatives?
I might turn this over, but thank you, Mr. Chairman. I couldn't agree more with your clarifying thoughts, and it just makes sense because currently the only place they can get money is try to pass a bond, or it's got to come out of the general fund. And in the case of Casper, they minimize the need because of lack of funds and put about a few $100,000 out of our 1 cent to try to help. On here in Casper, we have 135 miles of underground storm water, surface water, and I forget how many miles, 360 miles of piping for sewer. On top of the 135 miles. But that's a bigger system, bigger needs. But your point, in my opinion, of our smaller communities, this isn't a Casper shiny image. And you've really struck on that, Representative, and totally agree that somehow we have to pay for these things as time goes on. And this makes the most sense, whether it's 50 cents added on to a bill or $1 added on to your water bill. But this would be a separate fund that would not go into the just general fund, but would be allocated for storm service.
Mr. Frazier, maybe a question to tag on to the representative's clarification question. How are the towns out there dealing with this? Are they borrowing funds from these other accounts? Is that what goes on? And then in other words, as a constituent, in my district, they would be paying for sewer and water, but we're borrowing that money to take care of surface water. Is that generally what all of our municipalities are doing out there?
So, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the question. And I don't have, comprehensive information on what each of the communities is doing in that regard at my disposal right now, but typically storm drainage funds are taken from the general fund, as Representative Sweeney said. And of course, cities and towns do try to budget for that, but as the representative has indicated, sometimes we have events that exceed what we anticipated, and so they do have to amend budgets and get funds from other places. And this clarification will allow them to have dedicated resources for that. And I appreciate, the chair, Representative Duncan's thoughts on that, and I would agree that certainly would not only put us in a better position to deal with those events, but would certainly be more transparent as to where those funds are coming from. Thank you.
Representative Plant.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I do have, I guess in regards to this, I'm looking at this, if we want to clear up any ambiguity in the law, I'm fine with that. Really where the rubber meets the road is this whole idea of adding a fee, right? So that's the big kicker. That's the policy question. Cleaning up the ambiguity, that's easy. Big kicker is and fees for surface water diversion. There's your policy discussion. And so what I'd like to know, and I haven't heard it, and I'm looking forward to hearing some of this with further testimony, is simply this. For over the last 100 plus years, Wyoming has gotten along without this kind of fee. How did we do it? And what has led us to this point now where all of a sudden we need to have what is akin to a rain tax? That's essentially what it is. And so I guess I'm struggling to understand, and the reason why I bring this up is because I look at it even from my own community. My community, boy, we'd love to get into things like, building our rec center. We've got $3 million, we're gonna build some brand new softball fields. We've got our own, electric utility that we own and operate. We've got all of this stuff that we're spending. We've got beautiful art all over our city. It's wonderful, right? We can't do the main things. Then what in the world are we doing with all this other stuff? And so I guess what I'm trying to nail down and what I'd like to hear from some of these others in particular is have we exhausted every single one of our tools, or is this just one of those ways where we, in my mind, it almost lessens the accountability as someone who sits in a city council or something like that, who doesn't want to have to make tough decisions and doesn't want to cut the art or some other, project or recreation or whatever it is, or giving us social services or whatever it might be. We got to decide between that and stormwater. And stormwater is the obvious thing, but it's hard to make some of those decisions. So I just want to hear how in the world the last 100 plus years have we gotten by without this, and why we're needing a rain tax right here, right now.
Representative Sweeney, you want to tackle that one?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Clem, I guess I don't see it as a rain tax, but as more of a public safety. And I definitely want to get some of the mayors up here that have really, they're the folks with the real heart and soul of our communities and best interest in spending policies. In our case in Casper, I don't see the frivolous spending or the other things that you might have talked about. In our 1 cent, which was passed with I think 72%, this past go last fall. Those monies aren't put into operations. The city of Casper has been really diligent about spending those on infrastructure versus operations, and to that end, replacing water mains, sewer mains, and then trying to upgrade as they go. But I do believe that we've exhausted, and that's why this issue came forward. And I got involved was this has been a lingering problem. It's nothing new. And how did we get along for 100 years? It's like a lot of things as systems grew, was the funding there, and was funding adequate before? And as the federal government, just like the Clean Water Act and a lot of these green acts, and cleanup of oil refineries. When Amoco started in the late 1800s or early 1900s, nobody cared of, they cared what got dumped into the river, but what was underground. Things changed, laws have changed with the federal government, and this too, things have changed. Surface water, as an example, a number of years ago at the hotel, I added did an indoor swimming pool in our courtyard, which was closed. We always had a horrendous problem with runoff. And so when we built the new pool, I had the city come over, and why can't I take that surface water and dump it underground while I have things open into the sanitary sewer. Was told, no, that's not possible anymore with, and this is 10 years, 15 years ago, with the way surface water rules and regulations have changed. You can't just do those things anymore. And so all we're trying to do is keep up. And I can speak for our city. I don't think we're misspending those dollars. And we're going through controversies now of just getting insurance for parades permits. That's a huge controversy. And that's what it's come to, is more police and those type of things. But anyway,
I think parade insurance, we can fold that underneath state health insurance on the next one. I do want to get through this portion so we can get to some of our officials who have made it here today. I'm sure they can answer some of the questions that Representative Clem as well with regard to what they're spending and what they're not. But go ahead, Mr. Fraser.
Just a quick observation, because I think through the chair, I think Representative Clem makes a good point that I don't want to be missed, and that is that communities provide these basic need type of things, these health and safety things, but there also our constituents expect, and you are, most of your constituents in the city as well, or town, they also expect these quality of life issues. And look, it's Maslow's hierarchy of needs on a community-wide basis, isn't it? If we don't have the money for the safety, health and safety issues, we're gonna have to spend on the health and safety issues, and that's money we're not gonna be able to spend on quality of life issues, which like public art, like recreation, and those are the kind of things that you'll see disappearing from our community, which not only is a shame for those of us that live in those communities, but also could have a very real effect on tourism, which is a big deal for us here in Wyoming as well. So again, I would just reiterate, and I'll get out of the way, or whatever my mayor's want me to say after I will, but I just appreciate the simple approach and the clarification that we're looking at taking now. And it really is just a matter of one final point, Mr. Chairman, if I may. I like the approach to putting the enterprise section because it is akin to, the water systems that exist, and the principle of an enterprise fund within a city or town's or county's budget is a business-like fund, and it's supposed to pay for itself exactly. And so that's what we're asking to do as these expenses have escalated, as the issue is more complex. We'd like to be able to have those systems pay for themselves, so that we can continue to provide all those health and safety issue services, as well as enhancing the quality of life for communities. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Appreciate your indulgence.
Senator Casey.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I don't see it as akin to an enterprise fund. It's, I see an enterprise fund for utility services very clear to me. I don't see an enterprise fund looking for things like roads, parks. I don't see an enterprise fund looking for that. I don't see an enterprise fund looking for storm drainage. I see it for water. It's measurable. It's got a very dedicated network, and there's an easy way to charge for it. I just don't see it for here. I have no idea. It looks more like a general tax. It might be an assessment on property length or whatever, but I just do not see this enterprise connection. Especially with both enterprise services, they're going to compete for that. Private utilities, electric utilities, for example, are often enterprise. I don't see this.
Gentlemen, thank you. I'm gonna allow you guys to step back so that we can have some of our other officials come forth, because maybe they can help to answer some questions. Thank you very much. Fraser, like you said, you maybe wanted up here on a continual basis. Have you back up here?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Maybe you could, Representative Clem had a couple of questions. Senator Case had some comments.
It's really a question.
Yeah, it was more like a question. It says it was a question. Anyway.
Thank you, Chairman.
Take it
I'll
away.
try and address what I can at least. As far as kind of the overall issue, some of the points that I was thinking about as I was listening to comments. The city of Cody probably has a couple of storm drains that put in my Buffalo Bill. I mean, in some of that section. We have, what has happened here, I think, is there's been decades of deferred maintenance for these, which what I would consider infrastructure pieces within the city. And then you combine that probably with some of the regulations that have been, and albeit for public safety, that have been pressed upon our municipalities to take care of. Just a quick aside, the mayor of Keetsey, which is yet another 350-person town, not too far from Cody, he's informed me that he keeps getting pressure from the DEQ to do something to mitigate their runoff from their streets just to go into a beautiful river, the Great River. And so he's got no way to pay for those things other than coming hat in hand to the state. And they use a slip or something to that effect. So really, I think, unlike parks, some of the issues that we're facing with this is that very important, in a way, regulation to keep our rivers clean. And so I think that's where it becomes a little bit more of a utility as far as the discussion goes. I was elected like all of you. I was elected to represent the city of Cody by all the residents, or at least the 60% that voted for me. And they're looking for me and my council to try and come up with solutions for these kinds of issues. I think that I'm prepared at least to go back and talk to them if given an opportunity to put this within another feather in our quiver to go ahead and arrow in our quiver to be able to use to take care of this problem, discuss that with my constituents, and tell them, and this is how we can go about taking care of this problem. So I guess that's where I really would lean on the body here to give municipalities this opportunity to take care of what I would consider really an issue of protection of life, safety, health, and property for our cities and towns.
Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Mayor. Mr. Mayor, thank you for participating again. Really appreciate it. I did want to note really quick that Senate File 20 did not pass this last session. 9 to 21 on third reading in the Senate. And House Bill 298, brought by Representative Sweeney, was a resurrection of that bill in the House that died 4-5 in the House committee. We didn't actually kill a good Senate file. We would do. Yep, problem. But Mr. Mayor, so another arrow in your quiver, and I appreciate that. But this is the same, or at least I suspect this might be the same issue that I have with the other municipalities that really want this. Have you ever tried through the methodology that exists in statute, which is taking it to your voters? Has that ever been brought forward in the city of Cody?
It hasn't been brought forward in my community yet, possibly in other municipalities, but these are really just problems that our public works department is really diving into more recently. I think what we've been able to do up to this point, when I say that, I would say probably a few decades ago, is when there has been some problems, when we were a little bit more flush, we were able to probably take care of those things through some of our general funds that were left over. However, most, particularly I know Cody, we're
we're not in that situation now. We really don't have any way to pay for these capital improvements. Certainly not out of our general fund, which would what this would fall under as it stands.
Mr. Co-Chair?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the existing statute allows for you to be able to raise essentially a special purpose tax on property owners within city limits to be able to fund this. So it wouldn't be a general purpose. It'd be more in line with exactly for this job. But and the reason I asked about having never done it is most municipalities have. I think Cheyenne has, but most of the time what we hear on for outfits that haven't tried it is because it's just not that sexy of an issue to try to sell. It's not like a park or a rec center. Folks get excited about that versus stormwater, kind of tough to sell. Have you had those conversations with some of your constituents in Cody?
Mr. Co-Chairman, in my neck of the woods, probably much similar to your area, Mr. Co-Chairman. What seems to be sexy for the voters tends to be these infrastructure projects, things that the artwork, the quality of life things. We generally try and find ways to co-op with private partners to do things within town and try and address those quality of life things. As far as our infrastructure issues, that's what we did with our last special purpose tax. We targeted our sewer lagoon facility, very sexy. Our chip sealing and I believe ADA ramps were our three, and that pretty much took care of, for us, our $5 to $6 million for our overall $13.5 million ask from the citizens of our county for our last special purpose tax.
Any other questions for the mayor? Representative Edwards.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I believe that whenever these subdivisions are brought in, that they are taken over by the city with the idea that they're going to take care of them, just like the streets that you took over. Imagine that the streets that you took over was probably there when Buffalo Bill was around too, but you updated it, which brings it back to it's your responsibility. And you can do a capital facilities tax and special purpose tax for that. You have bond issues to do that. And I commend you for using your taxes for those that are real needs, not taking care of the quality of life issues up front. That's what most of them want to do. And being representatives of your community, you need to take care of the life-threatening issues before you do the quality of life. And making hard decisions is what a lot of politicians don't like, because they like the sexy ones that help them get reelected. And I believe the tools are all there right now. You do not need this. You agree with that?
Mr. Mayor, I think there's a question there.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Edwards, I would have to respectfully disagree with you on that for most of what I've stated prior, but I do see your points. Thank you.
Any other questions of the mayor? Thank you.
Thank you.
Would anyone else like to come up? Okay. I would ask that you, some of us know some of you, and but I'd still ask that you state your name just for the record. So
Sure. Mr. Chairman, committee members, good afternoon. My name is Jonathan Tykert. I'm the city administrator of Douglas. I'm going in for Mayor Kemper, who couldn't be here this afternoon. Thank you for your consideration of this amendment. This change in statute will allow stormwater systems to operate as a utility, similar to how water and sanitary sewer are now. 40 states today now recognize surface drainage as a utility. Every other western state and adjacent state to Wyoming recognize stormwater as a utility. Billings, Montana was the first location to implement a stormwater utility. They did it over 50 years ago in 1964. Today, there are more than 2,000 local governments nationwide that operate a stormwater utility. Most of those, it is in order to comply with unfunded federal and state mandates such as the Clean Water Act and National Pollutant Discharge Permit. Storm sewers are expensive. In Douglas, they're funded through our city's general fund, which is lumped in with fire, police, and streets. And in Douglas, nearly half of our street repair costs goes towards storm sewer. In the past 2 years, the city has spent just under $2 million to address stormwater issues. Because of that added cost of stormwater, we were delayed in many of our projects in addressing needed street repairs. And projects are put off until we have the funding in place to address them. And our needs are different than other locations. Prior to coming to Douglas, I worked in Afton, where I was the administrator. We had no surface water drainage system at all. There was no curb, gutter, or storm sewer there. For the most part, surface drainage was contained on site. Afton was built on a alluvial fan, had very porous, gravelly soils, 100-foot right-of-ways, 10-acre blocks, 2.5-acre lots. In Douglas, we have higher densities, tighter soils, that more clay, more bentonite in the soil, more extreme storm events. It's not in the form of snow or precipitation comes usually in a couple minutes time, it seems. The proposed amendment may provide, I believe, an important tool for communities like this to address our needs without petitioning the state for stormwater. Fees are an equitable, reliable source of funds with which to finance costly infrastructure upgrades that are required by increasingly stringent federal and state regulations of stormwater. Thank you for this opportunity to provide my thoughts today and for your consideration of this amendment. Thank you.
Becker, just for my clarification, thank you for turning that off. Clarify for me what's gone on the last 10 years or so with regard to the federal government. Have they come in more repeatedly to visit with us about surface water? I remember 6 or 8 years ago, I served on a 3-year committee to mitigate runoff water from the county fairgrounds here. That was all driven by EPA, but there's more of a presence on this surface water stuff from the feds.
Mr. Chairman, yeah, that seems to be the case. As you've seen the proliferation of these stormwater utilities across the country, I believe it's being driven by probably the previous administration and some of the rulemaking with that at that time.
Any other questions, Co-Chair?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Tiger. I really appreciate you coming over and talking to us about this issue. Clearly, it is an issue because we've heard from multiple municipalities. I'm going to ask you the same question I asked the prior municipalities. Have you used the existing statute that allows you to go to your voters and get approved for that levy?
Not to my, Mr. Chairman, not to my knowledge that we have.
Anything else? Thank you very much. Anyone else like to come up and visit with us about stormwater issue this afternoon?
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Vanderkamp.
Thank you. I would like to propose a question to the audience and to my fellow committee members who seem to know that Cheyenne is the only community in the state to have availed itself of that particular statutory provision. And I would just like to know if that was before or after August 1st of 1985, where 12 of our citizens were killed in a flood and 70 were seriously injured. And if that's really what it takes for the voters to approve something like that. Just a question.
Thank you, Senator. Mr. Mayor, thank you for being here this afternoon. Good to see you.
The arguments have been made, and excellent questions. Casper was front and center of the previous discussions at the recent legislature, so I appreciate my colleagues from Cody and Douglas coming forward, and Mr. Frazier to explain that this is a statewide problem, not just Casper's problem. And I think, as most of you know, we have, to use Mayor Hall's terminology, we have deferred maintenance, and it's significant.
And as Senator Nethercott notes, we'd rather deal with it now rather than find out later that we had these exposures. And so we have been advocating for some time for the right to create a utility, very much like the water utility and the wastewater utilities that we currently have in place. And it's difficult for us to understand the difference, because this is really a service that our citizens use just as they use their water service and their wastewater service. The challenge is they don't often realize they're using it. And so we would like the authority to create this utility so that we can address these deferred maintenance problems and get our system in the condition that it should be for the safety of our citizens. And so I appreciate all of the remarks that Representative Sweeney made earlier, because I think he described the problem very well. And I appreciate, again, my colleagues coming forward. I don't know that I have much to add, but I would just like to emphasize that we view this as a user fee. And that is why we believe that this is the appropriate way for this service to be funded. And with that, I will take questions.
Mr. Mayor, thank you. Any questions of the mayor? Representative Clausen.
Mr. Powell, new subdivisions, the developer pays for the drain water, drain and sewer, and drain water, correct?
Correct.
So if you create, this is where I have a problem with this whole idea. If you create this as a utility, anybody that lives in a new subdivision, technically they just paid for that when they bought their land or it's new development. They just paid for that infrastructure through their costs through by the law and the development costs. And then the fees basically would have to go back to old neighborhoods that didn't have this sort of good drainage before. So if you sell this as a utility, it kind of takes it imposes fees on people that don't necessarily need your product and gives them to people that the older neighborhoods.
David Frazier is chomping at the bit here, so I'll let him take this.
Mr. Frazier.
I don't know if I can thank you, I don't know if I'm just trying to help. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, through the chair. That's a good observation, and I appreciate that, because it highlights the issue, which is that when the parts of the infrastructure that were built closest to where it exits the city and enters the, in most cases, the river, when those were built, it didn't anticipate the amount of growth. I'm not sure if it did anywhere. It was not oversized to handle the amount of growth that would come later. And so what we have is, in these new subdivisions, we have, you're putting in infrastructure that is adequate to get it out of that subdivision, which is really what you can reasonably ask of that developer. But you're really sending it to a funnel. And what really needs to take place in most of these communities is to be able to bring up to the correct size those downstream parts of the infrastructure. And I would point out that it is the new residents are having an impact on that downstream infrastructure because they're sending more water down to the tip of the funnel. So I think that makes it important. I think that makes it important even for them. I guess is the way I'll respond to that question, Mr. Chairman. I see that I have a legislator to my left.
Well, thank you, Mr. Frazier. Before we go any further, and we'll continue our conversation, I do appreciate the speaker this afternoon. So welcome, Representative Horst. It's good to have you here. Representative Sweeney, you look like you'd like to weigh in on this.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. To that question in particular, I guess I take it one step back through the chair, Representative Clausen, is if that's truly of concern, then why let them hook on to water and sewer? Because just because it's a new development, aren't they also responsible for paying what came before them, but that investment's already been paid for? So they're hooking on currently with user fees as they use. The same is not true with stormwater because that never was set up. And yes, that new development is in place and maybe it was designed of such that it's got adequate retention ponds and those type of things to take into consideration for that growth, maybe not 20 years down the line when the next subdivision goes in and feeds and feeds and feeds. But I think it's all got to be part of the puzzle. And this part of the puzzle with surface water, to me, has been left out of the equation for so long. And now we've got to take care of the problem, and really the user fees are the fairest way instead of making the cities go into debt by passing a bond issue, going to the citizens to try to get that passed. But I just think that even on a new development, they need to pay just like they will in the future on sewer and water hookups.
Thank you, Representative. Other questions? Representative Clint.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I want to get back to this idea of, we've got existing options now. I really appreciate you talked about the quality of life issues versus those life and safety kind of issues that government truly is responsible for. So the way I see it, you've got three options. One is to forego some of the quality of life and focus on the safety aspects of providing that good infrastructure. That's one. The other thing you can do is you can take it to the voters. The other thing you can do is you could go down to the slip board, and that's part of why they're in existence to do this. We've got three good options right there. But we don't like any of those options is kind of what I'm taking from all of this. We want another option. We want to make another tax, essentially is what it amounts to. And so can you tell me why it's so hard to not do those other three? You talked about I understand the quality of life one, okay? And I get that as politicians they don't like to make hard choices for fear of not being elected. I get that. You talk about the other two because that's been touched on, and I don't know why it's so hard and why it hasn't been tried. We have it in our laws. It's been there for a long time. Why don't we do these things?
Mayor, floating a bond or going to the slip? What can you talk about those?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Those options are available, of course, and I guess I would like to point out that with our 1 cent, 50 cent tax that we've been collecting, well over 70% of those funds have been spent on emergency services, streets, sewer lines, water lines. And so that is a commitment we made to the voters based on survey results. So we are spending the vast majority of those funds on those basic services, not drills, not rec centers, not other, you could say, wants versus needs. So I think we have been responsible with that. And of course, the slip board would be available as well, but the competing demands for that money are significant. And it is. If people use the word sexy, I guess we can go with that, but it is a hard sell that this is the most important priority right now. And so we just keep going back to the fact that this is an appropriate utility with a user fee, and that as an enterprise fund, essentially, people would be paying for the service that they use proportionally, not based on anything other than the amount of land that they own, because that is proportional to their use of the system. And so those other mechanisms are certainly there, and they could be utilized, but to our way of thinking, the user fee concept is the most appropriate.
Excuse me, Representative, hang on one moment, I guess.
All right.
Let's go to, Ranger, go ahead, because I think you had something to add to what the mayor said.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess I would just add that, with all due respect to the chair, to the representative, several members of the committee have talked about how politicians don't want to make difficult decisions, and what we are in fact asking for today is the ability of our politicians to make a difficult decision. We're not asking you to put into place any fee or tax. What we're asking through this legislation is the ability for our local government officials to make a difficult decision in consultation with their constituents. Along with that, I guess I would just refocus, if I could just refocus for a second. A lot of good questions have been raised today, and I'm sure we're not done raising good questions, and those questions all deserve to be addressed thoroughly. And to that end, I'll just point out that what we're seeking today is not approval of this legislative change, but rather for you to move to continue this discussion and allow us to drill down deeper on some of these issues. So again, today's ask is just simply, a lot of good issues have been raised that deserve exploration, and so we would just ask that you would include this on your agendas going forward. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Furby, thanks for taking a pause.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me make a point here and get your input. In our community, we weren't interested in funding stormwater drainage until we had a major flood. And then the city found out what its liabilities were, because a lot of the properties in certain areas found out the city had a major liability, and the city actually had to buy those properties, and turned out to be very expensive for our community. So I'm in favor of a proactive approach, something like this enterprise fund, to start funding those projects. So I'd ask your input about the liabilities that the city's faced.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
The point is well made, and that's why we're here. We know that we have weaknesses in our system. It's not a question of if we will have a flooding event, it's a question of when. And we would like to deal with these things before it happens. Cheyenne had their tragedy back in 1985 with loss of life. I believe they attempted to vote directly after that, if I remember correctly, and were unable to convince people to vote for that utility, even after having that experience. And so we're trying to be proactive, exactly as you described, sir, and deal with these problems before we experience those kind of tragedies.
Mr. Mayor, thank you. Senator Schuler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just would reiterate, I think this is a really good move. Our city actually is a little bit on the cutting edge of this, not that we're on the cutting edge of anything else, but when I came on the city council, we actually already had, and I don't remember if they got money from the slip board, it happened before my time, or how they actually had this happen, but we actually charge stormwater fees as well as our water fees at our city. And so we have raised our water fees once when I was on the council, and we raised our stormwater fees once. And again, opening it up for public participation, but we had at least 2 floods since I was on the council, and one which was caused by the city's stormwater drain that got plugged up, which caused some damage to some vehicles and homes and whatnot. So this enterprise fund has kind of saved our bacon in a couple different situations. And the folks there don't seem to even blink an eye. They blink an eye more if they get the water fees raised, but the stormwater fees are very low. We very rarely raise those unless it's the infrastructure need that we have. But I definitely agree that every city needs to have something like this in place, and I hope we will.
Thank you, Senator. Appreciate that. And then former city councilman, that's helpful. Mr. Mayor, thank you. I'm going to let you step back so we can go to someone else if someone else would like to come forward and visit with us about service water.
Thank you all for your time.
Mr. Chair. Well, Representative Clem. Yes, sir. Thank you. Well, someone's coming, I'm just kind of confused there, just heard from the good senator. And she sounded like that her town is already doing this without legislation. I'm trying to figure out if we need the legislation if towns are already doing this.
Mr. Chairman.
Representative Flynn, Senator Petcock.
Thank you. If I may, and I'm somewhat speculating here, but I have a feeling it probably has to do with different legal interpretations. So, my understanding, the city of Casper's attorney doesn't believe it's lawful for them to assess a fee for stormwater. Evidently, the Evanston city attorney feels differently, or has no idea. And then, when the fee was assessed, lawfully or unlawfully, no one challenged it for a court determination as to the lawfulness of that assessment. So we circle back around to the issue of the ambiguity currently in the law for cities and towns to generate revenue to pay for stormwater drainage. And so what I hear is an option that's currently in the books is the bond, right, which is a debt. So what we're saying is we prefer our cities to go into debt or to take on a debt limit as opposed to paying for it as they go, paying through fees and other types of services. So really does seem to be also a bit circular in that concept. But here's what we do know, is that our cities and towns are not dealing with stormwater drainage systems in a way that probably leaves our citizens exposed to a dangerous situation. And so our cities and towns are trying now to be proactive in finding a different option for them to solve this problem. So I believe it is reasonable, and I believe that there's enough protections for the public and for those local taxpayers through their elected officials to determine if this is the right course for their community through this proposed legislation. So I think that goes to answer the question of why some communities are dealing with this differently than others. If there's a legal ambiguity that needs addressed with a solution from the cities and towns for how to move forward.
Representative, that's one theory. We can continue as we go along. If we choose to go along with this issue, we'll continue that. Good question. Mr. City Manager, it's good to see you.
Thank you, sir.
Please state your name for the record for us, even though some of us know you.
I'd be happy to. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Carter Napier. I'm the city manager here in Casper. And I'm pleased to be in front of you again, speaking on this matter. We are in favor, as our good mayor pointed out, of this idea. Believe in this concept. And I was impressed to hear of the way in which the concept has taken hold in a number of other cities and states throughout our good nation, where they've relied upon the representative democracy that exists at the city council level to make decisions of that nature, similar to decisions of the nature you make as it relates to creating legislation, albeit on a much larger scale here in our local state. To answer the question that's been posed a couple of times here with regard to whether or not the city of Casper has ever taken up an initiative, if you will, requesting a special purpose excise tax to support a stormwater program. And I would probably have to say, I don't think we have. But here's what I do know. Throughout the process that we go through every 4 years to renew 1%, our 1% tax in our community, in our county, we do go through the effort of coordinating what I consider a fairly sophisticated survey of our constituency, our public, our citizens, even on a larger countywide scale. And every 4 years, they tell us what those priorities ought to be with regard to the expense of those 1% dollars. Uniformly, the priorities that they identify typically deal with streets, they typically deal with police and fire, and they typically deal with water infrastructure. Stormwater consistently falls to the bottom of the list. And so for us, it seems like a zero-sum game for us to take the bottom end of our priority list, if you will, and try to run an initiative or some sort of ballot issue with regard to projects of that nature. Particularly when we've got projects like police stations, a library, fire stations that are typically on the public's mind more so than stormwater. So generally speaking, that would be the rationale that I would advocate for, were the city council that I work for, to ask about those possibilities. With regard to quality of life issues, I really appreciate those questions. I have been in the scenario where we have had to make tough decisions, both from a staff standpoint and a city council standpoint, as it relates to meeting very, very basic service needs. And Representative, if I remember those days, maybe not too fond of them. When it came to cutting back on things like sculptures and other quality of life things that city that I worked for at the time was dealing with, that really accounted for very little of the solution to create opportunities to provide for those basic services. We then found ourselves cutting back on parks mowing, which I got a lot of comment about from the public. We went down to eliminating positions. We went down to plowing on a non-overtime basis only, which I also heard a lot of feedback on. We even considered, we did, we even considered charging fees at the pool, which nearly broke the core of the world open when those suggestions were brought to the table. My point is that while quality of life things do take resources and do take money, it's not one of those things that typically, for most cities in this state anyway, are able to spend a lot of dollars on and dedicate a lot of percentage of their general fund toward. And so from that standpoint, cities and towns are forced to decide between streets, police, fire, and water, and some of those other things that the limited funds that make themselves available for are considered with. I am pleased to report to this group, as well as kind of my closing comments, if you will, that by this point in time, this committee, although there are iterations of this committee over the last 2 to 3 years, have heard from, I think, probably 10 separate communities. We've also heard from the representative of those cities and towns, both, again, in different iterations, that have suggested that this is the right thing to do, the right way to go. I remember last year hearing testimony from the county representative representing the counties, who also suggested this is the right way to go. And I think the question relies now to you as to whether or not you think this is the right way to go. I think cities and counties represent a pretty broad constituency in this state, and I hope that you would feel comfortable that were you to go home with a decision of this nature under your belt, supporting this type of idea, that constituency would thank you for it and be supportive of it.
Thank you for being here, City Manager. Any questions of the City Manager? Questions? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. We appreciate it. Thanks for being here. Anyone else like to address stormwater issues this afternoon?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I'm Jeremiah Regan here on behalf of the Wyoming County Commissioners Association. I do come up here in the past, you've probably heard that we've opposed optional municipal taxes. And we would still continue to be in that opposition based on the proposals that have been brought forward in the past. On this issue, the commissioners firmly stand behind the cities and towns, understanding that this is an important issue that needs to be addressed in their jurisdiction. And the approach is to assign a fee to those users rather than an approach that may impact other optional taxes that the counties might participate in or be funded by other users. So again, Mr. Chairman, we would stand in support of the cities and towns in their request to have this option available. Alexander.
Hey, questions? Thanks for being here. I appreciate it. Anyone else like to open the microphone on surface water? Else? Okay. Committee, I'd like to go to public testimony, although that kind of smacked is public testimony. Would anyone from the public like to come up and address this issue that we've been covering? Anyone from the public? I'll close public testimony. Committee, I guess I would ask, what's your pleasure on this one? Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, I think we've got two separate issues here. One is, should we get a bill drafted? And I'm going to move to draft it. And Mr. Chairman, presuming that gets a second and carries, then we've got the issue of is it an appropriate issue for a budget session? And I'm going to propose we give the co-chairman authority to decide, as they decide agendas going in the future, whether we want to deal on an ongoing basis this interim, or whether it's something for the next interim aimed at the general session. And that's a practical political question of, can we carry something like this in a 20-day budget session?
Okay,
Mr. Chairman, the first motion, yeah.
Okay, the motion has been seconded by Senator Nethercott, and now discussion. Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, and this is the motion just to have the LSO draft the bill as proposed by this particular group, and you have specific language.
Mr. Co-Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think a lot of this in regards to language is already implied. I mean, if you read through Title 15, I think it's essentially already there. Now, however, much like Senator Nethercott mentioned, there is ambiguity. I can't say. There's a difference of opinion.
Ambiguity? Yeah. Ambiguity.
Yeah. So I guess with that being implied, I would make an amendment to the motion on the second page under B to strike the new language and fees for surface water diversion. Because if you read that with the added language, or I'll wait for a second.
Sorry.
Seconded by Representative Clem. So we do have a proposed amendment to the motion. Next. Absolutely, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And the reason why is if this is strictly and only for clarity, then at that point, we're clarifying on the above by saying and diverting surface water from inhabitants or their property. And then under the portion B, prescribing and regulating rates for the use of water, it's already implied at that point that there's really no reason to add that secondary language and fees for surface water diversion because that's already implied. So I don't think it's necessary moving forward. And that's my amendment.
Guess that was my question, and I'm looking to my left on this one, if we're going to create some of that ambiguity again.
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Scott.
I would urge us not to try to amend the thing at this point. I think we need to see a bill draft and see it worked out, and then I think we can be much more intelligent about whether or not it needs amendment.
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Case.
and I would echo those sentiments, Mr. Chairman. I think it is ambiguous when you have and diverting surface water, and you try to eliminate it from that from B. It's prescribing and regulating rates for the use of water. Well, I don't think you use surface water. You try to dispose of surface water. And I think good lawyers like Senator Nethercott would just have a field day with it.
Indeed, I would.
Senator
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I think.
Senator Nethercott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The language needs to say, and I would go with Senator Scott's wisdom in waiting to see an actual bill draft. But I would request that language remain as proposed.
Okay, we have an amendment on the floor. It's been moved and seconded. And so all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no.
No.
And so that amendment has failed. And we're back on the original motion by Senator Scott. Further discussion.
Question.
Kelly may call. All in favor of Senator Scott's motion to draft the bill, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, no?
No.
That motion has passed. So we will have a bill draft going forward that we can at least look at. Mr. Co-Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so it's kind of a secondary two-step to this situation. I think it's, so in reaching out to staff in regards to kind of clearing up some of this situation. Some attorneys say you can, some attorneys say you can't. We do have an attorney general. And it does not say in statute that we can use them as a joint committee. It doesn't say we can't. So the option is to reach out to the Attorney General's office, put the question to it, and if he or she decides to answer in this regard, great. If not, then we just keep marching on and clean it up ourselves. But we could save ourselves a little time if the Attorney General comes forward. In fact, we're about to hear about another issue where the Attorney General did come forward and gave some clarification. So I don't know that Mr. Chairman, I don't know that I would need a motion on that, or if we could just write that. I guess I'd like discussion, if that'd be all right with the committee, where the chairman just to reach out and see if we can get an opinion.
Mr. Co-Chairman, unless there's strenuous objection by the committee, co-chairman could both reach out and just see if we get an answer from the Attorney General. We can call if he picks up the phone.
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Senator Nethercutt, real quick, and then we'll go to Senator Scott.
One is, I think we're going down dangerous territory every time there's going to be different legal interpretations from learning different statutory language that the legislature goes to the Attorney General's office for an opinion to solve that. One, Attorney General's opinions are not binding precedent. They're just one other attorney's opinion. Even though it's a special attorney, it's only another attorney's opinion. And so if the Casper City Attorney, bless them, I don't know who they are right now, but makes a legal determination that the Attorney General's opinion is wrong, which has been known to happen, then where does everyone stand at that point? And so you just add one more attorney into the layer of different legal interpretations where we as a legislature that writes the laws can really clear it up for all lawyers. And I really think that's what this committee prefers to do, is to tell the lawyers what they're actually really saying, rather than the lawyers telling them what they meant to say. But we can continue doing that.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, let me say at the outset, I'm very much in favor of passing a bill of this nature on the surface water drainage. I think our local officials are being responsible in how they're trying to handle what is potentially a disastrous problem. I think they're telling us the truth. The current laws are not adequate, haven't proved to be adequate. But I do think we've got a potential problem here. And I would move that we explicitly give the chairman the authority to decide to bring the bill forward on the agenda next or at a subsequent committee meeting, or to defer it to the next interim based on the judgment as to whether it's appropriate bill for the budget session, based on what they hear from attorneys, whoever they choose to consult, LSO, city attorneys, attorney general, so we have a better notion of where we stand. But to give the co-chairman authority over the future agenda on this one, because I have some reservations about taking it to the budget section, even though I think it's going to be very much easier. That's my motion.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator.
Give the co-chairman authority.
If that's a motion, I would entertain a second real quickly on that. Gives the purview to the co-chairman. Okay, guys, for lack of a second, Senator Case.
Mr. Chairman, I was just going to speak against the motion if I got a second.
There have been good points made, committee. Certainly some cautions with regard to going to the Attorney General.
sense that the committee's okay with the co-chairman either going or not. But if there's enough reticence other than by one or two members, I'd like to hear it. Otherwise, I think the co-chairman may reach out to get one more opinion. Representative Duncan.
Mr. Chairman, I would concur with the good senator on the end that we are the lawmakers and too many attorneys muddle up the situation. So I would prefer us to move forward with the drafting of the bill before we get too many opinions. Just my opinion.
Okay, thanks, committee. I do appreciate comments made, and I think we'll go forward with the plan as executed here. We're going to draft the bill, but in the meantime, we're going to seek one other attorney's opinion. Chances are we may not get that opinion back anyway, so we'll see how that goes.
Mr. Chairman,
Okay, Senator Dennis.
point of clarification or a question to the committee. Have we not been instructed not to reach out to the Attorney General's office and that they don't represent us, to provide us opinions like that? Has that direction ever been given? Am I making that up?
That's a good question, Senator. I don't remember it ever being given, but I don't remember what I had for breakfast either. So, Mr. Co-Chairman.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. There's been some motions made in Management Council, but in large part, those have not passed in specifically. And it's one of those aspects that something that you enjoy as the chairman of a committee. You're not reaching out as an individual legislator anymore.
Okay. Committee, we're going to move on. Surface water is finished and we will get drained. Yeah, we're onward.
Thank you.
We are now all set for local government participation in the state health plan. Mr. Co-Chairman, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And that was the other topic that I was alluding to in speaking about the Attorney General. The prior decision about the local participation in the state health plan, the reason that was brought up during this last session had a lot to do with the fact that A&I had stated, the way we read the statute, you cannot participate. And now the Attorney General said, the way we read the statute, you can participate. So the way I understand that A&I division will be allowing that. So I don't know, I guess we'll listen here from advocates or people against. But the way I understand it, statute reads right now is they're allowed.
I appreciate that, Mr. Co-Chairman. If there is someone who would like to come forward, Mr. Frazier, are you headed this direction to advocate on behalf of this issue, or Mr. Reeman, would you like to take the lead?
I thought I saw there.
Oh, maybe that's how you start.
We don't want to get the announcement.
We're seeking enlightenment. So,
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Rob Hayes. I'm the manager of the Employees of Officials Group Insurance Program. It was not my intention to talk. I was here to be available to answer questions. The situation we're facing is, over time, it's been the position of the plan that cities and counties and towns were allowed to be on the program. However, we did have the city of Riverton reach out to us last fall. And their attorney had looked at the language in the statute, and from other legal precedents outside of insurance, had determined that they were eligible under the plan. At that point in time, we did ask for a formal Attorney General's opinion on that. It took quite some time. We just recently got an opinion on that. And the Attorney General's office said yes, based upon the current statutes.
cities and counties and towns could participate in the employees official group insurance program, much like K through 12 districts. And we would take them on the same basis.
Which Mr. Hayes would be by choice. In other words, they would have to reach out to you.
Mr. Chairman, you are correct. This is a per choice. Now, we don't go out and market. We don't go out and sell our services. As you can tell with the K through 12, there are 48 school districts out there. We have one, which is the Natrona County School District. So we're not out to compete with the private sector, but we are an option for them to come out there. When there's bid situations, we do not participate in bids. Again, we let them know the rates are on our website. The booklet as far as how the rules associated, what you have to do to become part of the program is out on our website. So we're not marketing, but we are an option.
By the way, Mr. Hayes, thanks for stepping up and giving us a little background on that. And that was helpful to me. I didn't realize each municipality had requested, I looked at that, but that's helpful. So committee, any questions, Mr. Hayes? Anything else, Mr. Hayes?
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Heathercott.
just real briefly, ANI, you are an agency of the state of which you have designated Attorney General to represent you, is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, that is correct.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hayes. Anything else? I'm going to go over now, gentlemen. Anything you'd like to add to this?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Jeremiah Reamons with the County Commissioners Association again.
For the record, David Fraser, Executive Director of the Wyoming Association of Municipalities.
And as you know, the association has been requesting to have authorization that county employees and alongside our partners, municipalities have access as an option to the plan. And we're certainly pleased to hear of the Attorney General's ruling. I did want to just note that I did provide you 2 documents earlier today, which is data that I collected from the counties relative to their current statuses relative to health insurance. Just a couple of things that I wanted to note as it relates to the conversation of whether they would actually take advantage of this option. First, of the counties that offer health insurance, of which there is one that does not, that's Niobrara County. 18 of them are self-insured or will be self-insured starting on July 1st. Wyoming County will actually go into self-insured status on July 1st. A number of them use reinsurance programs like Blue Cross Blue Shield or administrator of this program. Niobrara County, as an example, as I mentioned, does not offer their employees health insurance at this point in time. They are exploring it and have established a budget in order to provide for health insurance, but they've only set aside $500 per month per employee. If you're looking at the state plan, they're going to have to contribute more because they have to come in at the same status as the state of Wyoming offers. So it's not a determination that they would actually come into that plan, and I have talked to them. The other piece that I just wanted to point out quickly is that a number of the counties do not offer health insurance to their part-time employees. There's a threshold at the state level that once you go over that threshold, if it's 20 hours per week, then you have to offer your part-time staff health insurance. So those counties that are not would have to do that. And there are 3 or 4 more other provisions that they would have to abide by. Again, as was mentioned earlier, only one of the school districts has ever taken advantage of this option. And I can't tell you at this point in time how many of the counties would, but we're certainly excited to hear that they could move towards that, and the counties will begin looking at that as an option in their budget cycles now.
Okay, any questions of Senator Scott?
Mr. Chairman, used to be that there wasn't much enthusiasm for this particular proposal because the cost of the state plan was so high. Basically, the legislature designed a rather rich plan. The question I've got is the passage of the ACA change things enough so that the state plan is no longer a lot richer than what's available in the private sector, and that's driving people to either go self-insured, because that does avoid some of the ACA mandates, or to try to participate in the state plan. Is that one of the drivers here as to why there's the interest in this?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Scott, if I can provide a little bit of legislative history. The body actually took up a bill in 2015 that would have allowed the counties at that time to join alongside the school districts and BOCES on the state plan. That bill, in fact, passed both bodies, both the House and Senate, but got caught in the legislative wranglings that can happen at the end of session and never got signed. Became law. This bill came up this past session, a little late for us to get mobilized to actually participate in the conversation, and it didn't move. As it relates to motivation, let's be clear, the counties will have to pay their share if they want to come into this, and will have to commit to a 5-year period. And Mr. Hayes can speak to this far better than I can, but that's intended because the plan has peaks and valleys, and over that time, that 5-year frame should ensure that it's relatively flat across that period. But the counties will have to come in the same way that the state does. The driver, of course, is increased healthcare costs. I haven't heard conversation around the ACA. I did provide the increase or the percent of budget that it takes up for the counties. It's roughly 9% across them. It varies anywhere from 1% up to 14%. And they're looking at options to decrease costs. But again, it's going to be something they're going to have to evaluate on a case-by-case basis, and whether they can actually afford to come on to the state's plan under the parameters that the state will impose.
Follow-up, Senator Scott?
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, I am concerned we are looking at some risks of adverse selection in the state plan. We allow people to come in optionally or not. We dealt a little bit with the schools. But I'm concerned there, and I am concerned the current systems use, they may be self-insured, but they're using a good deal of private sector management and private sector reinsurance. And I am concerned that one of the things we're doing is that, frankly, that the ACA back in 2010, 2011, when it passed, did change the world and gave an advantage to government as opposed to private sector. And maybe that's what we're seeing here. So, Mr. Chairman, there's some things that I don't understand. I don't understand how the Attorney General on his own went ahead and allowed something that we haven't managed to get all the way through the legislative process.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead, Senator Nazarka.
if I can, and I know that I'm moving forward here, but so the Attorney General's office does not issue rulings. They issue opinions. So assuming that it was the previous Attorney General who issued that opinion before they left office, we now have a new Attorney General who may have a different opinion as to the interpretability of the statute, whether or not local counties can join in. And so, I mean, I don't know which Attorney General, but they're simply opinions based on an interpretation of law. They don't have the force and effect of law. They don't, doesn't make it lawful just because the opinion says it is. Only the court, the judge, can do that. I think it's important understanding how you weigh that opinion. I'm not saying it's wrong, right? I have no idea. but how you weigh it needs to be carefully considered. It's not a ruling. It's simply an attorney's. That's all.
Thanks for that reminder, Senator. I'm going to go to Mr. Hayes. You had a comment, I think. Thank you for being here today. Back some things up. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Endicott, it was the new Attorney General that did this particular opinion, but it was also started under the previous Attorney General opinion, and the department as a whole did not change what they felt from the last Attorney General opinion to Attorney General to the new. So the staff were in concurrence. It just hadn't been completed under the previous one that finished up under the current.
So, Mr. Hayes, you're saying that it crossed over between two Attorney Generals. The previous Attorney General had started to work on that opinion. This new one finished it up. Did I hear you correctly?
Mr. Chairman, you heard me correctly.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Frazier, do you have anything to add to Mr. Freeman's thoughts?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, David Fraser, Wyoming Association of Municipalities. I believe I've taken up more than my fair share of airtime in this committee today. To that end, I would just say that this sounds like excellent news.
Anything, committee for okay, thank you very much. Anyone else like to come forward on local government participation in the state health plan? And then I'll go to public comment, or we'll consider this public comment. So come on forward. Yeah, same thing. Let's go to public.
Mr. Co-Chairman, members of the committee, I'm Wendy Curran with Blue Cross Blue Shield of Wyoming. I'm joined today by Ms. Shannon, who is also in charge of sales and marketing at Blue Cross Blue Shield of Wyoming. We, like many, were not aware of apparently a recent AG's opinion, so we came today on the understanding that this would be a discussion point about moving forward or not, and some considerations that we wanted to bring to your attention. As you know, Blue Cross Blue Shield is a not-for-profit insurance company serving only Wyoming. We have among our clients, as someone said earlier, a number of public entities, most of whom we provide third-party administrative services for school districts, for cities and towns, for counties and county employees, for county hospitals, and probably a number of other smaller governmental entity groups of which I'm not aware. As we've had some lead and pest control groups and so on. So we do provide a large share of our business in assisting those plans, those employers with their employee health benefits. I think that we have to be able to distribute it to you today, just some points for some consideration, based on the fact that we were taking a step back from where we are now and talking about the basic premise of whether this was a good idea or not. It seemed to us at the time that there were sort of two separate policy parts to this, and one is certainly, is it wise for the state to consider providing health insurance benefits for all public employees? Many states do that. They offer a public employee plan. It includes school districts and cities and governments as policy for this is how we will help fund those employees who work for us in that capacity. Or is this simply using the current state employee plan as an option for those entities to look at an option in the market? I think that I might start there because where we just ended the discussion with the AG's opinion. Were this to be purely, here is an optional place that you may come and choose to consider joining for the insurance for your employee benefits. What we are concerned about is the language that the employee group plan sometimes uses itself in offering this option to public entities. And I think on question 3 of the paper you may have before you, in coverage options, making coverage available to the school district, BGI has defined itself as, quote, a competitor in the Wyoming benefits marketplace for K through 12 districts. The state's program is just one benefits option compared with many fine insurance companies and third-party administrators. To me, that's a different message than saying we're going to help provide benefits for public employees. And what that says is we're going to compete with the private market in providing you a state-funded, state-owned and operated option to what's available in the private market. That in and of itself is not the only discussion point, but certainly should we decide to go that way, we would offer some concerns about what might happen in that. Increasing, I know in the previous discussion at last year's session, increasing the size of the pool will mean lower premium costs. And we would say, in some cases, but not always, what it will do is give a more predictable risk in the pool, may lower administrative costs, may allow for more innovation, but the cost of the premiums in a pool is purely determined by the risk profiles of the individual in the pool. You can have a lot more people in an insurance pool, and it may still be a lot more costly than anything else you have. Blue Cross Blue Shield of Wyoming recently has had a couple of experiences. One related to a brand new, great life-saving drug that changes a enzymatic condition that people suffer with for all their lives. It's a breakthrough drug. It means that they will live healthier, productive lives much longer. So that's all a good thing. And the cost for that drug is around $3 million a year for one individual for the rest of his life. Another example is we insure a group, and suddenly within this group, one of the children develops or has or is diagnosed with hemophilia. It's a huge expense, $6 million a year, somewhere give or take that. Those few individuals in a group can completely offset any savings that you may have from expanding the group. I think that's something that the state and the legislature should be aware of in, as you all know, the high-risk probabilities within any kind of insurance pool. Increasing the pool, trying to get lower premiums for some groups versus others, doesn't really address the root problem that we have in Wyoming that we all suffer from, and that is the high cost of healthcare. You may realize by the maneuvering of how the groups come in and what the risks are, lower premiums, you have done nothing to change the cost of healthcare or the structure of the healthcare system in Wyoming. And as Senator Scott has pointed out, you do risk pulling certain groups out of the private market into the public market, and driving up the having an impact on the private market, on our business, on the business of other private insurers, leaving them with a higher risk population with less services and fees and business opportunities to split those across, which again helps some, probably harms some. I don't believe that there is that much impact from the ACA since we are primarily dealing with self-funded groups, and a number of those already are protected from some of the ACA provisions, not all, but I think it's a fairly uniform set of circumstances across the spectrum for a self-funded group. But actually offering coverage through the state employees group plan as an option, because it might be more affordable, or it might be easier to administer, or there might be some savings for smaller public employees groups, might have some very practical applications. It will, however, mean that there are significant differences between what is provided and required by the state
public option, public plan versus what we are required to do in the private sector market. I've talked about a couple of those on this page just to draw your attention to them. The 5-year lock-in plan, boy, that's great. That really does protect the state group from those very high cost risks, and it moderates them, and everybody sort of moves towards the means over time. And so it says we can take somebody in with some high risks, and yet if we keep them for 5 years, we will mitigate that. We don't enjoy that privilege. We can take in a very high-risk group and treat conditions and take care of high-cost illnesses, and they can leave tomorrow. Those are our regulations. We don't have any way to absorb that lock-in period. Financial solvency, the state plan relies primarily for its financial solvency on funding from the Wyoming Legislature and employee contributions, the salaries of whom are paid by the state of Wyoming. I know that fairly recently, the governor's office and the state treasurer's office have put in plans and policies to provide a fund that serves as a reserve fund. Should the plan have higher than expected premiums, there's now access to a pool in the state treasurer's office that can be drawn on to assure that the claims can continue to be paid. That's a broad policy guideline. It says we should maintain this much money, and that's what we should do, and we'll put an emergency pool over here in case we run out. Beyond that, they'll probably come back and say we need to look at a premium adjustment. On the private side, we're responsible for those reserves. Our premiums have to include the necessary money to make sure that we have reserved whatever it might take to cover unexpected claims costs. There are very strict state and to some degree federal regulatory requirements about the amount of reserves we must maintain. If we go below a certain point, the insurance commissioner can step in and take over our company. Those are all consumer protections. And I would want to make sure that we're aware that that does one of those factors that creates a little less fair level playing field if we are competing with the state plan for business. Another area which are sort of the things that we're required to participate in, state and federal taxes and assessments. We as private insurance companies help fund a number of consumer protection and safety net programs. The Wyoming High Risk Insurance Pool is funded through assessments. The Wyoming Health Insurance Guarantee Association is funded through assessments, so that when Win Health goes out of business, the people that it had insured still get their claims paid, because all the rest of us insurers pay an assessment that goes towards making sure that the people who held that insurance were not left with unpaid claims. We pay into the ACA, and that is one place where we are subject to a number of health insurance taxes, federal insurer fees, and all sorts of things which get passed on into premiums that the state plan wouldn't necessarily need to do. So is it a competitive option for school districts and cities and counties against what they do now? Or is it even close to being a similar field? And we believe that to selectively say, you can come and join us and our package, which has all these, because it may be cheaper than what you're paying over here in the private sector, is essentially unfair competition, or at least competition that has some things that are built out of balance. I can certainly offer more information, but as I said, we came intending to say, here's some things that you might take into consideration as you make this decision. I hope that you will continue to have the discussion. When we visited with the county commissioners at the last session, we indicated that we would be very supportive of studying this, of making sure that those issues have been addressed, that there was actuarial soundness to what the state is taking on or understands that it's taking on. So we would fully support that, but we would be concerned if we were to say, the Attorney General's opinion says we can do it, so let's move forward and do it.
Thank you, Mr. Appreciate Mr. you being here as well. Any questions, committee? Sure. Thank you very much, you guys. Big handout. Did we have someone? I'm sorry, Representative Ruby.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me ask, you're intimating private sector costs will go up. And so are you talking significant premium increase for private individuals to, if these government employees move into the pool?
Mr. Co-Chairman, Representative Murphy, I'm not saying that very specifically. I can't tell you that should this happen, other private fully insured plans will have higher premiums. Those premiums are primarily dependent on healthcare costs. But I will tell you that the pool of people who have insurance in the state of Wyoming is pretty small. It's that small town along the street scenario. So that even though we may have a business group here and a small group here, and we are realizing some management fees for managing the third-party agreements for self-funded plans, there are only so many people. And if this half of this business goes this way and takes good risks with it, then yes, there may be higher costs, higher premium costs, fewer people. The exact other side of that argument about helping people leave, and the only people we are left with in Blue Cross Blue Shield in Wyoming are the sicker individuals, the higher risk individuals, then yes, their premiums could certainly go up.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I just have a question, and not necessarily for these folks, maybe they have it. And I apologize, my computer's not working, my access to the internet is difficult, but I heard we had a bill in 2015 that made it all the way through and then just didn't pass. And I'm assuming all of the fiscal impacts and financial information was prepared associated with that process in 2015. Does Ellis, if we can maybe get some of that? I know it's not timely information now, but still might be helpful getting our heads wrapped around some of these issues more thoughtfully than we've already done. So that piece, and asking too, if perhaps you recall preparing that data at that time.
Senator, that's a good question. And by the way, I had not remembered that bill made it all through. So I appreciated that reminder. And as we go forward, it might behoove us to chase down some of that. Ms. Curran, thoughts?
And Mr. Co-Chairman, Senator Nethercott, I too do not recall that the bill went through. I don't think that that's the case. It was discussed a number of times. If it got caught up in a procedural timing, it wasn't at the end of the session. It might have been some other place. But I know that the issue has come up in a number of other different ways. There have been studies on the public employee plan for years. The most recent one I think that looked at it was the Alvarez and Martin efficiency and streamlining. I know I don't have that right. But they looked into that about what would be the most efficient way to provide insurance. They had some figures about costs and how much more expensive our plan is than any other plan, or a larger percentage of the premium that the state ends up paying. And they said some recommendations for how to do that. I think there is a weekly report that looks at public plans. I know the NCSL has done some research on that. I'm not sure that to what extent a full, complete actuarial analysis has been that says, if the state takes in these groups with these demographics, what would it look like? And I think that that's one way that you can understand what the potential responsibility and liability
Okay, Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, two things. I too do not remember a bill going all the way through on this subject. I think there may have been an amendment to a bill or a budget footnote. It was proposed and may have gotten through one house, but I do not remember a bill on it. And Mr. Chairman, goodness knows my memory is far from perfect these days. Mr. Chairman, I would like to call attention to one particular thing in this handout, and that's that it would reduce the availability for assessments to support the Wyoming uninsurable pool. At the current moment, that's not a big deal, but there is a risk because of the way we've had great success with insurance sold through the exchanges because of the way we have priced the silver plan and priced a combination of the insurance department and Blue Cross. And the feds don't like it because it's costing them money, which has reduced the premium for Wyoming citizens. If the feds succeed in doing away, as they would like to, or at least some of them would like to, with our current so-called silver loading system, we're going to have a crisis with a lot of people unable to afford their insurance. And the whip pool is a potential backup solution to that particular problem, Mr. Chairman. So that point could prove to be a major deal. We could get around it by legislatively, if we had to go that way, putting that assessment on as a appropriation. I'm not sure we can sell that, but there is a potential for a real problem.
Mr. Chairman, just a question if I have, anybody who can answer it. How long would an actuarial assessment, a solid one, take, be done approximately, in order to understand this impact? There's the A&I raised their hand.
Ms. Curran, do you have any sense of?
Mr. Co-Chairman, Senator Nellicott, I do not. I know that the insurance department on determining some actuarially figures, particularly for the Section 1332 waiver. I know that perhaps A&I has done this previously with their consultant. I don't know.
Mr. Hayes, do you know? How long would it take for that kind of an assessment?
Mr. Chairman? Mr. Chairman, when we look at actuarial figures, have a study come in, we look at our particular book of business. And so we say, here's our utilization per member per month. If you were to break this apart, we say we've got roughly 40 different state agencies, the community college, university, and all of them. Utilization changes on a yearly basis, so some are high one year, some another. So what generally you would do is you'd say, okay, what is the average makeup of the K-12 districts out there, which is roughly the same one we already have. You look at the average age of the male-female mix, about the same. So really what we end up being is there's potential, and they can provide that. They can do that in a fairly short time frame, but it doesn't mean a lot. I'll tell you why, because one year you're going to have a bad year in a small group, another year you're going to have a good year. And depending on where you are in that cycle, it's going to raise or lower the cost. Now, our situation is an actuarial study really wouldn't give you that much as far as what the cost higher or lower features potential. You already know it can go up or down based upon actual utilization. And every group's is going to be different, ours included, because we're going to have good years and bad years. So if we take somebody out of the marketplace, just because we have 48 school districts, we've had one take. They came in, their utilization is pretty much mirrored in everybody else's. So from my standpoint, it says an average K through 12 district over time, average age the same, is going to be roughly the same. And we're going to rate, just like any insurer does, based upon what our claims expenses are for the group, what our fixed costs are, and that's what our premiums are going to be based
Very good, thank you. Ms. Curran?
Mr. Co-Chairman, thank you. I think we may have a slight, I think Ralph is correct when it comes to setting premium rates. I think what we are suggesting is that you would simply look at the potential of a group that may come in. Maybe it's large, maybe it's small. You would look at the demographics and you would say, you would make some predictable variable trends. If a group of this size, the age of this came in and they had average health risk as defined, it could have this much impact on the plan. They had high health risks, it could have this much of an impact on the plan. And I think that that's what we were suggesting, not so much about setting the premiums, but understanding the potential for the risk that you might be bringing on.
Well, and I think the senator, I don't mean to speak for her, but I sense that she's just as concerned as I am about the private market as well. It's not just that we're concerned about the state plan and what it's going to do to that, but, you know, we need to be concerned with what it's going to do to the private plan.
Absolutely.
All of our constituents too. So the committee, I swore I was never going to do this. Go this long without a break. And this has just continued to go on a little bit longer than I thought, so I apologize for that. We'll finish up on this topic and come back to it just as quickly as we can, but I'm urgently thinking we ought to take a break. So thank you two for being here. That's committee. I'd like to take a 10-minute break, and then we'll come back and decide if we want to take some action on this. We'll take some public comment. Let's take 10 minutes real quick. Okay. We have a little bit to finish up today. Have some of our clocks back about 35 minutes right now. Anyway, question on that, Mr. Co-Chairman. So, we are at a point in time where I'd like to take any and all public comment with regard to local government participation in the state health plan. This conversation precipitated in part because of a municipality asking about that. Okay, I'm looking at you, and the Attorney General opinion came about a month ago. Mr. Hayes, maybe you could clarify real quickly before the committee goes to this conversation. So the Attorney General issued an opinion, and what did that say again, and when was it?
Mr. Chairman, the Attorney General's opinion came out in April, and we've been working it out internally. And so very recent. The process was actually started in January, so it took quite a long time for them to work through this. I think it's because of multiple priorities that they had. And basically, how it sums it up is the language within the legislation, current legislation is political subdivisions, which from our position has been aimed at the LSO and the judicial portion of it, allowing them to be covered in the state.
Now, Mr. Hayes, real quickly, you didn't mean legislation, you meant statutes, right? Statute. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for the correction. So the gist of the argument from the city of Riverton and their attorney was that we're a political subdivision because of a court ruling in another area. Therefore, we should be able to come onto your plan, the state's plan. And my personal attorney general said, they probably have a good point, so he asked for a formal attorney general's opinion, which is.
And what did that opinion say in a nutshell?
In a nutshell,
help us with that?
Cities, towns, and counties are political subdivisions and can't come on to the state's plan. That's in a nutshell what it says.
So go ahead, Senator Gates.
Who gets to decide? The cities and towns.
Mr. Chairman, based on the ruling from the Attorney General's office, we at A&I feel that it's been supported by the Attorney General's office. We would be obligated if one of these entities came to us and allow them to come on, if they meet the same criteria as K-12 districts, come onto the state's plan.
Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, was the K through 12 authorized by specific legislation subsequent to the creation of the state plan?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Scott. Yes, it was. That was very specific because they were not considered to be a political subdivision.
And Mr. Hayes, I think that was, what, 2014 maybe, 13?
Mr. Chairman, it's been longer than that.
Has it?
So we've had the Dakota County School District for 9 years. So right about 2010 was when that happened. Now, I might be wrong on that particular day.
I remember that. Okay, Mr. Hayes, thank you. Appreciate that clarification. Any public comment on this particular issue? I want to go to the public now. Any public comment on local government participation in the state health plan? Going once, going twice. Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate you, Mr. Casper. I'm going to push send right now, Attorney General's opinion. I think it goes to all. So you can read that. It's pretty short. And then just on this issue, I think particularly counties, 2015 joint appropriations bill, just before you point out, I pulled it up and looked at the digest on it. Passed the House, it was a joint appropriations bill. I think Senator Ross and myself were chairman of appropriations. 2015 passed the House 58-2, went to the Senate and had an amendment put on by former Senator Meyer, passed the Senate 18-11. House voted 59-1, did not concur. Conference committees were appointed by the House and the Senate, and then we did run out of time kind of towards the end. It's like last day or two of the session. So
Mr.
that's
Speaker,
the most recent history. And there was another time in appropriations in 2013-ish, 14-ish, after the schools, another attempt to get very close at the last votes.
Do you remember, Mr. Speaker, anything about the amendment that created the difficulty in the joint committee?
Well, I actually have it right here. I won't go through the whole thing with you, but it's, yeah, I think it puts some more blocks on the counties to join, frankly. And it's more about requests for proposals and, other factors on the county before they could actually do it. So it kind of,
Well, Mr. Speaker, thank you for being here this afternoon. I appreciate you bringing that up. Some have found that, and I appreciate for those who haven't, appreciate you.
last thing I just add, Mr. Chairman, that appropriations, we always gave basically a ability or allotment for state health insurance, A&I, to hire up several more employees if all 48 school districts came on. Of course, that was never used because the school district has. Talking to Mr. Hayes, probably wouldn't be necessary if you had to have some kind of, authorized employees, not hired, but just authorized. So I bet, something like this happened, 150 political subdivisions come, then I'm sure appropriations will be here.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Any other public, Representative Country.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Speaker, could you resend that with the attachment?
I'll try. If I can't get it on my phone, I do it on my computer. I think,
Mr. Co-Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. You should have, everybody on the committee should have got it from staff, and if not, I'll just resend it out real quick and double check it. Thank you.
Thank you.
No, I just got it. I was the only one that got it. I'll set it up.
Mr. Co-Chairman is gonna send it.
Yep, got it.
That's what he meant to say.
Yep.
Okay, anybody else from the public? Okay, we're gonna close public comment on this. And committee, a lot of questions in my mind. I wonder if you have some of the same. Senator Scott, what are your thoughts on this issue?
Mr. Chairman, I have considerable reservation about the procedure of expanding it through an Attorney General's opinion. There's some real pros and cons here. The risk of adverse selection, the issue to what extent do we want to crowd out the private insurance business, and then what are the advantages? Given the ACA and what it's done to us, we've got to be pretty pragmatic about some of these things. There are some advantages to the self-insured route. There's some disadvantages to that. There are some fees and taxes you get out from under by going the public route. It's the ACA designed to take it down the all public health insurance route, and some of us really don't want to go there. I don't know whether at this point, maybe the best way to put a stop to this government expansion is a budget footnote. I don't know whether we want to try to deal with legislation on this. Mr. Chairman, I have some real reservations with the posture that we're in right now. Trying to figure out what's the best way to get a rational look at it, to see if it's a good policy to have the state plan going out and marketing to everybody.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Scott, thank you. I want to go to Senator Nethercott, but it's several points too that I'll make, but you might make some too. Senator Nethercott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of thoughts I have right now in light of the AG's opinion is that it doesn't really matter what legislation we put forward. The all the political subdivisions can now join the state insurance plan. So I think the primary concern of this committee.
Wait, just one more.
Dave, who will challenge that? So we need to really understand, I think, maybe this is more appropriate for the Health and Labor Committee, I'm not sure, but the implications of that, if any, at all, in my conversations at the break, I understand that the immediate effect would potentially expose, this really only talking about 4,000 employees, I guess, and their families. And it's been shared with me that that's a de minimis financial impact to the state. I would like to see actual data on that. So I think the committee needs to further evaluate that, but I think we also need to be mindful of the horses out of the barn. And that's what's currently happening. I'm also curious to hear from Senator Scott on his expertise on this issue. It sounds like the term adverse selection is a term of art. I don't know what that means, and if you could share with us what that is.
I'll go to Senator Scott in just a moment, but I actually had some concerns on that front. But I agree with you, Senator. I think the horse is out of the barn. And even if we were to pass the committee with some legislation, take it forth to say that we don't want local governments involved in the state health plan, what if in the meantime, they've already enrolled? Then you've got an issue. And so, and regarding adverse selection, that just means, what if one county entity, it really has spiked their rates and they're way up there because they have a couple of employees that have bad situations? Well, of course it's going to look better to go to the state plan. But Senator Scott, I'll let you take that ball and run with it.
Mr. Chairman, basically to explain adverse selection, if you have a situation where it's strictly the choice of the group to join or not, they may find the private group is cheaper as long as they have a relatively healthy population. But you get one individual with an expensive chronic disease or something like that, then that group may go over to the state, and the state winds up taking the expensive risks and raises the total costs of the state. That's what you worry about, Mr. Chairman. There was a little of that when the Turner County School District came over, but it was so large that got kind of subsumed in the rest of things. They had some bad experience. What led them to join. Much more risky if you have a lot of small groups involved. You're much more likely to get a case of real adverse selection, where you create incentive for the small group to take a cheaper option that's outside and then come to the state only if they wind up with somebody with a chronic disease that they're likely to have for a while.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to look back on this form that we received from the commissioners. And just from my information on this, based on my community, the percent county overall budget spent for employee health insurance, just based on this for my community, just to put a positive spin on this, 12% of their budget, whereas the average of everyone else is 9%. So just for my own opinion, this could make a significant impact on my municipality's budget. If they're spending 12%, if this saves just the slightest bit for them, this would be huge. It could actually help offset their stormwater. Thank you.
Representative Duncan, I can't speak for the speaker, but I did follow the good speaker on the Appropriations Committee. And I suspect that was one of the drivers that brought that legislation forth in the first place, was the opportunity that maybe save the budget along the way with our local areas. Representative Clint,
I do, so just reading part of this attorney, Mr. Chairman, thank you. I guess my question is this, I've kind of skimmed through the Attorney General opinion. It references 93201, I looked up 93201, and the contention is yes, is cities and towns and counties or their political subdivisions, yes. But 93201 is very explicit as far as, let me just read, it says the state of Wyoming and its political subdivisions and school districts may obtain group prepaid plans or insurance for life, health, accident, or hospitalization for their employees and for elected officials, except for members of the legislature, and enter into agreements with prepaid plans or insurance companies with this coverage. Insurance coverage for school districts or Board of Cooperative Education Services employees, meeting the definition of an employee under 93203A4, shall, if elected by the school district report under subsection E of the section, be provided through the state employees and officials group insurance plan in accordance with 93202 through 93218. The whole point of that is saying, yeah, cities, towns, and counties are political, and I'm not a lawyer, okay, I'm just reading through here, and it's like, well, yeah, of course they're a political subdivision, but we say in this statute in particular, the only two that can enter into an agreement with the state plan is BOCES or school districts who elect to do that. That's what the statute says. I gotta read through it. I'm a little miffed, I guess. I don't know, at this point, I mean, I understand we have our Department of A&I director who says, hey, this is where we're at, this is what we got to do. I don't know if the governor is the one who needs to really be the one to say, hey, wait a second, I'm going to put the reins here on this before we actually open up Pandora's box. Because I think it could get real messy real fast. And I don't know, if it's appropriate for this committee to maybe even do that and draft a letter and say, hey, Governor, would you please take a look at this? This is a serious issue and we're concerned. And I think maybe that's the appropriate action at this point.
Representative Clem, that kind of goes along with what Senator Nethercott alluded to earlier, which is just a little bit of concern going forward without all the information that we really would like to have in front of us. Senator Nethercott, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I may, on break, I did inquire of A&I. That's where I received that 4,000 employee figure and asked about the financial implications to the state. And A&I indicated it would be de minimis in light of the volume of employees we currently have on the state health insurance plan. And so instead of me speaking for him and relay the conversation, I'd asked the chairman to ask him to come back, potentially speak for himself. But when I do look at the chart that was given to us regarding the county health insurance employee count and cost, it looks like the counties spent for employee health insurance in fiscal year 18, a little over $53 million. And so I understand it's not appropriate to just translate that figure into the state costs, but I hesitate that it is not going to be something more than nothing. And then just a side note, what is going on in Campbell County today? 588 county employees costing $12 million in health insurance. Easy to be in Campbell County. Side note.
Yes, that final piece, we'll come back to that, Senator Nethercott. But Mr. Hayes, would you come forward? Oh, you've already come forward. Thank you very much. Would you like to tackle it a little bit more on what the impact might be, what the numbers are?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Nethercott, I'm going to give the example of the Trumbull County School District. Part of the cost associated with their plan prior to coming onto the state's plan was plan design, commitment to monies that went into employee accounts. They had a different employer contribution, actually a higher employer contribution than the state's plan. And they came onto the state's plan with the idea it was a budget saver for them because of it was the easiest way to make some changes into their program to cut their budget. Now, their utilization has been right on par with the rest of the state plan over time. So while they were spending more in that particular circumstance for their premium and the cost associated program, stop loss premiums, all those associated costs, some of those costs go away. For instance, broker fees. They had a broker on that plan. We don't pay for broker fees. We don't have any profit margins built in. So there are costs associated with the program that could go away. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't have or run a bad experience and your costs will be up. That's the reason we have that 5 years in place, because over that 5 years, our goal is to be equal with the board. And then they could leave the plan and be square with us. But just in any given year, your costs are based upon what's happened in the past, and also some pooling charges if you're out there on some kind of a fully insured basis, because you're not only paying for what your costs are, and you have a limited amount of credibility because a group of 100 does not have the same credibility level, which means the claims are going to repeat themselves on an annual basis. You also have to consider what's going on with the pool as a whole. Now, they could be contributing to the pool, or they could be drawing from the pool in any given year. That's what happens with our plan. We basically have our many different entities or pieces in the plan. ANI contributes 1 year, it takes away the next year. So where they are right now is an indicator of where they are right now. Doesn't mean that's where they're going to be once they sign on the line to go with another insurer, or stay where they are, or come with the state's.
Mr. A, do you have any way of guessing what kind of response you'll get on this front? How many municipalities, how many counties, employees would come on? I was interested in the fact that only one school district has come on thus far. And the testimony we've received on the education committee is that the private market is cheaper, or at least who they are purchasing insurance from now is cheaper than the state one.
Mr. Chairman, that's partially true. And part of it comes down to how much it's costing the district. Now, I visited with a school district up in the northwest corner of the state. Their rates are substantially higher than what ours are. But their employer contributions, because the way the district has decided to pay out as far as the amount the state provides them, isn't up to the levels ours are. So while the premiums for the employees is much higher, coming onto our plan, the cost of increasing that employer contribution, plus some districts do cut their employees off at 30 hours, and a lot of the classified staff are kept under 30 hours, so they're not eligible for the health insurance. Suddenly taking between 20 and 30 hours out there and making entities responsible for paying premiums for those to come onto our plan really keeps a lot of school districts out of our program.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Here's my sense, and maybe the co-chair can jump in on this. My sense is to take this under advisement, visiting with our attorneys, and I believe we would still have time to do some things in September. It might be that would give us a little bit of time to consider this. And that's kind of where I'm at. Mr. Co-Chairman, any thoughts on that?
No, I think that's spot on, Mr. Chairman, and I'm in agreement.
Okay, committee, unless there's anything more, let's move on. Yeah, there's a dead horse. Okay, let's stand down for about 4 or 5 minutes so that Joe can get a hold of our next presenter. And so that will give opportunity for some side conversations for all of you. I am. Scott. Okay, good deal. Thank you for your patience and thanks for carving out some time this afternoon being with us. So committee, let's get into corporate governance and some of the reasons that we have listed there to have a visit with Mr. Meyer. So I'll let you just take it away, Scott.
Hey, Scott, this is Representative Lindholm. We're having a hard time hearing you.
We're getting, that was feedback from me, Mr. Meyer, so.
I think it's the speaker. I think he's on speaker.
Yeah, go ahead and try now again, there, Mr. Meyer.
Okay, Trevor Lindholm, can you hear me?
That's much better, yeah.
Crossed out on the screen.
You catch that, Mr. Meyer? You're good to go.
Okay, I guess my question to the committee, Mr. Chairman, is from what area do you want to start first? The information that I had received from yourself and from Chairman Landon, and as well as President Perkins, dealt with two different cases, and I told him I was giving my summary, so whatever one you want to work with, we can do that, and then we can address any other issues that you might want to talk about.
That sounds real good, Mr. Meyer. Let's cover those court cases first and your thoughts there.
Okay. The first case that I have that was sent to me was a case titled Pienza versus TNB Marble and Granite. This was an interesting case, although the information that the LSO had and that was available in public did not give a full big detail of a lot of the facts behind it. From what I'm able to gather and talking to various people is that Salmeco Pienza was a member of the TNB Marble and Granite LLC. And at the time that he passed away, his daughter, Kim Pienza, was the administrator of his estate. And what she ended up trying to do is file for a judicial dissolution of the LLC. And the court in Connecticut ruled that because she was a transferee, if you will, that she was not able to fulfill that or take that course of action because she did not have authority to do so. I thought is this, on that particular case, I think the court did it exactly right. The law in Wyoming prior to our amendment to the statutes back in 2010 left a lot of question as to who received what interest when somebody either passed away or was disassociated from the LLC. Wyoming Supreme Court had several cases where they dealt with this, primarily cases with Lieberman in it. But I think after the 2010 statutes were revised, the interest of an LLC can kind of be broken down into at least two different areas. One an economic interest and one an equity interest. And then you as a member of an LLC have the right to transfer your economic interest to whomever you would like, because you're not running the company. But transferring the equitable interest or the equity interest that you have in the particular position of whatever member or manager with the LLC is personal to you. And the reason that is done that way is because if A and B decide they want to have an LLC, one of them may pass away, they're going to talk about that, but they may not want to have any of the spouses or significant others involved in that entity. And so the economic interest may go to the spouse, but not the equitable interest, if you will. So in this particular case, apparently the estate wanted to do it through this gal, Kim Pienza, who is the personal representative, wanted to dissolve the LLC, and without an operating agreement that said that she had that authority. The state of Connecticut, much like the state of Wyoming, says that you have to follow our state statutes regarding operating, and she did not have that authority.
So Mr. Meyer, on that point, your suggestion would be that's why you always use an attorney to form LLC and have a good operating agreement in place?
My advice would be always having an operating agreement, yes. Well, you know, I don't want to get any conflicts of interest here, but, that would probably be.
All right, thank you. Any questions so far, committee? Mr. Meyer? Senator Nethercott?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Why this case out of Connecticut, unpublished? Why are we looking at this case in particular? How did this case come to the committee's attention?
I can answer that for you, Senator Nethercott, but we were requested to look at it by Senate President Drew Perkins.
With any additional instruction, Mr. Chairman, if I may?
Senator Nethercott, no.
Just another lawyer.
Just not true.
We should ask AG.
We should ask AG. I don't think that was a question for you, Mr. Myers.
We did, excuse me, Mr. Meyer, this is Senator Landon. We did reach out to the president, haven't really had an opportunity to dig down a little deeper on that.
Well, if I may, Mr. Chairman, my guess is at this point in time is that we wanted to make sure that there was nothing in the Wyoming statute that would in fact cause a problem in a situation such as this. And I did send up there, and my apologies, some misunderstanding I had with Ellis over, and it was my fault, but I did send up some statutes to show here's what the Connecticut statute, Connecticut general statutes that they have, and then a comparison to Wyoming. And so that's the 4 documents, you know, one's with and one's without, and broken down like that. But there are a lot of differences in there, but not anything substantive with respect to the Wyoming statute. The one that I will point out, I think that is important, is in the winding up statute under Wyoming statute 1729-702. And that statute differs from Connecticut in that there are some things that say shall and some that say may. And Wyoming says you shall take care of the liabilities and all the things that go with it. Under Connecticut, they have that too, but then they say you shall file with the Secretary of State your articles of dissolution, and this Wyoming does not. So there may be some issues there with respect to how Connecticut did this and how those people tried to figure out how to get rid of this company. Apparently, the majority of them did not want to have the company dissolved. But in Wyoming, unless we have that kind of situation, I think that like I said, the Connecticut court did it correctly. Under Wyoming statute, 1729-702, if you are the last remaining member and you pass away, then your state will, your PR, whoever has the right to step in as a manager. So I don't know. My only guess is that we wanted to make sure that we didn't need to change our laws. And I can tell you that from my opinion, looking at this, I don't believe we need to modify Wyoming's LLC statutes based on this case.
Mr. Meyer, thank you. I want to go to Senator Nethercott real quickly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Hi, Mr. Meyer. I too was confused, and I came to the same assessment after reading this case that is pretty consistent with our statutes and what I think our Wyoming court would do under similar circumstances. But as I think about who provided us this case, President Perkins, who is an estate probate lawyer, and this case really deals with a deceased shareholder's interest in a corporation, assuming he's experienced this issue recently, and that's why he came across this case. Can you look at it a little bit differently as I just came to that conclusion, knowing who provided us this case? If we need to actually, instead of looking at our corporate governance statutes, look at our probate statutes as it relates to corporate ownership interests in a probate?
Mr. Meyer.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Yes. My understanding at this point in time is that in the event of something like a deceased member leaving the entity and being disassociated, I look at this from, I guess, the standpoint it's different than as a corporation, because in a corporation you have shareholders and your shares may or may not, depending on what kind of restrictions are in the bylaws, what have you, mayor, but the shares are the voting interests that get passed down or what have you, unless there is some restriction on them. With an LLC, it's more like a partnership, and so it is more intimate in the fact that how we're going to run this. The sharing of liabilities and what have you may be different. I think that the only thing I can tell you about it is that with respect to a deceased member, unless you have an operating agreement, then his or her interests go to whoever he wants them to go to or she wants them to go to. But that doesn't mean you have an economic or an equitable interest in running it. Where like it's a corporation, the sheriff will pretty much dictate who controls what, the percentage of shares.
Senator Nethercott, follow up, or are you good for now?
I'm good now. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, Mr. Meyer, keep on going.
Okay, then the next case that was sent to me is a cable case. This one is a great example, if you will, of the bad facts make for bad law. I want to step back before I go into this case and remind this group that we did have, after the 2010 amendments or changes to the law, we did have a case in front of the Wyoming Supreme Court. That was the Green Hunter case that tried to establish here are elements that must be looked at when it talks about piercing the veil. And for those of you who don't are not aware of what that concept of piercing of the veil is, the liability shield that a corporation or an LLC might have with respect to its members, but in the case of alter egos, I think if you, or fraud or something like that, and the idea is how do I pierce that veil and get to where I want to go. There are certain specific elements. When the Wyoming Supreme Court entered its decision on Green Hunter, one of the factors they considered in that case was whether the LLC was in fact a single member LLC. This legislative body adopted a change in 2016 and specifically put in there, these are the only four that you will look at. You will not develop and you will not consider whether a member is a single member LLC or not, determining whether there's a piercing corporate veil or the LLC veil. There are two kinds of piercings, if you will. The one that was in the Green Hunter case was people trying to pierce into the assets of the member. So they trying to pierce through that veil to get to the members' ownership of things and whatever assets they might have to get satisfaction of the judgment. This case is a reverse piercing. So in the Sky Harbor case, this is an individual who went out and contracted with DirecTV to provide cable TV services for, 168 rooms or whatever it was. Figured out a way that I could bill for those, through my hotel charges and people wanting to use TV, and then proceeded to tack on to everybody else the ability to use that DirecTV commercial or service. So when that happened, he ended up with something like 2,500 people he was charging and only paying for 168. Clearly a bad thing, clearly what he's trying to do, but then he was trying to hide assets into his various entities. DirecTV was able to get a judgment against that particular company, but then they wanted to go back and try to get not get personally, but charges were against the judgment was against him personally. Now they want to go back and get the assets out of the company. So it's kind of a reverse thing. My only guess as to why we want to look at this today is that in that decision, one of the elements that the court looked at was in fact whether there was a single member LLC. And I don't know any reason why we would need to change much because we changed it back in 2016. There have been a lot of cases around the country that have looked at this. This has been a very important case when it comes to piercing the veil. But again, I think the fact that our statutes say protecting the member and the LLC that you can only look at four elements, and you can't look at a single purpose or single member LLC as one of those factors. They address it, but that is only for probably direct piercing, and there may be something that we want to talk about with respect to reverse piercing, that you still cannot use that, but that's the only reason I can think of that we would want to talk about that today.
Yeah, Senator Nethercott, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, wonderful job, Mr. Meyer. And I agree with your thoughts there and feel like Wyoming's efforts in 2016 to exempt the sole member LLCs from a piercing analysis is appropriate and the right place for Wyoming to be on that subject. I wonder if maybe this is from President Perkins too.
Indeed it is.
So thinking that he might have taken my thoughts when it comes to the Judiciary Committee reviewing my Supreme Court opinions, staying current on our laws with those, and maybe trying to do that with us. Corporate cases across the country, maybe, and that's how this came to be. Because I don't see any action that we should take out of this case either. I think that this case that comes out of the Fourth Circuit is very unique in its facts and not one that we should need to feel the need to respond to with a whole new concept of reverse piercing. And I think if that situation comes up, it is best to leave that up to going to the Supreme Court to provide the factor analysis associated with reverse piercing as opposed to us trying to legislate that.
I think on those points also, Senator Nethercott and to Mr. Meyer, extremely grateful for your explanation. But it does seem that is what Senator Perkins is doing, which is a good exercise for this committee, considering we do handle corporate governance. Title 17 is our baby, first and foremost, does come first. And it has been the initiative of the legislature over the last several years to try and attract more businesses through several different ways. So if there's an advantage there, then it's definitely worth taking. Mr. Meyer, did you have anything else to give on those two cases?
No, Mr. Chairman, and I think going back to a comment that Senator Nethercott made, I think she's exactly right. In the statute itself, it's 1729-304. It does say for purposes of imposing liability on any member or manager of a limited liability company. There may be some point in time that we want to look at whether imposing any liability the other way around, but right now I don't know of any. And quite honestly, anything that I think the legislator would take on, unless it's just clarifying, but this particular statute says the only four elements you can look at, and one of them is not whether the ownership is a single member. And my fear is that by trying to tackle this, by tweaking it a little bit here and there, a little bit there, whatever it is, that at some point in time we'll see another nasty article coming out that it was, grossly unfair when we talked about the Panama Papers and the Little House on the Prairie. And that is the last thing that this did, is to have somebody thinking that what we're trying to harbor is fraud. So by tweaking this now, I just think it may send the wrong message, unless there are more cases down the road that show this reverse piercing. It's not anything that's very standard. There's a lot of states that have rejected it. There's a lot of states that say they're going to adopt it in certain circumstances. But I think a major response would be to see wherever we're going, and then maybe if there's something that may come up out of this, but I don't know that I can advocate that we have a new statute or revision to the statute.
Senator Scott, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, could either Scott or Senator Nethercott refresh our memory as to what those 4 points, 4 reasons for piercing the corporate veil are, and specifically the one on the fraud?
Mr. Meyer, I know you've got it in front of you, but I'm going to defer to Senator Nethercott first, put her on the spot.
All right, here we go. Back to law school. I was the research assistant to Harvey Gale, professor and author of the book Piercing the Corporate Veil. So,
Nobody knows who that is. All right, keep going.
one is adhering to corporate formalities. So are
It sounds so naughty, actually.
right? And yet it's oh so not. But it is in the context of fraud. So the question is, so when you create, like Mr. Meyer indicated, when you create, the purpose and value of creating a corporate entity is to have the benefit of the corporate shield from personal liability. So the entity is only liable for the entity's actions, not you personally. So there's this concept called the corporate shield, essentially. So how do you pierce that corporate shield or pierce the veil of the corporation and the entity? And so you have to do that only if somebody doesn't do what they're supposed to for the reasons, before they get to avail themselves of that shield. So those things that we have listed in our statutes regarding corporate actions. So one of those would be adhering to corporate formalities. So are you having minute meetings and taking minutes of those? Are you keeping your accounting separately? So are you commingling your funds? So are you keeping a separate business checking account as opposed to just your one personal checking account and pushing that in with other businesses? Are you appropriately capitalized or insured so that your business is operating responsibly in the event that there's negative action? So those are the primary reasons for how you can pierce the corporate veil. Senator Meyer, or Mr. Meyer, maybe Senator, I know there's a few openings coming up. Are you aware of any others on the top of your head?
Mr. Meyer, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Nethercott, I am not. As Senator Nethercott has pointed out, exactly right. The statute under 1729-304C says that for imposing liability, the court shall only consider the following factors, of which one is not sufficient unless it's fraud. So, to Senator Scott's question, fraud is one, and inadequate capitalization is the second, failure to observe corporate formalities is required by law is the third, and fourth is intermingling of assets. Exactly the same thing that Senator Nethercott has stated. So you probably got to have more than one in all cases unless it's fraud. And that are the only factors that the court must consider in the Pearson case.
So, Mr. Meyer, let's pretend I own an LLC that has vending machines, for example. That's not a real LLC. But pretend that there may have been some commingling of funds because I'm lazy at the vending machine, and they don't adhere to good corporate formalities, as in I'm the sole owner of that LLC. I don't have meetings with myself.
Okay.
Is that an issue?
Mr.
I mean,
Chair?
don't give me legal advice.
Is that what you're
That can be pierced by veil, that situation. That sounds good.
Mr. Chairman, as soon as you had a judgment creditor trying to attack, trying to get payment on a bill that you have not paid, and then minus the claim, and if they could not get the money from your LLC, then there might be an argument that you in fact did commingle funds because you were lazy, you did not follow formalities, and so, for all intents and purposes, this is alter ego of yourself, you wanted the same, and I'll try to come after you by Thursday.
Gotcha. All right, so just don't get sued and we're good. Yeah.
Here, that won't go.
All right, so good practice there, team. Any questions for Mr. Meyer in regards to the requirements of piercing corporate veil? Being none, thank you, Mr. Meyer. Mr. Meyer, did you want to testify in regards to our other subject, which is corporate directors and shareholder classes?
Mr. Chairman, I'm willing to throw in my 2 bits. I don't know what the issue is. I looked on the member or the materials list that came with the notice of this hearing, and I do see a statute, but I don't know what the issue is other than whether a director probably owes a duty to, a higher duty to common shareholders versus preferred shareholders. Other than that, I can offer you, if there are any questions, I can offer you my thoughts on it. I do believe that all directors have a superior duty to common shareholders as opposed to preferred, being as that they're probably the ones that are on the line, but I don't know what exactly the issue is.
To kind of give the committee an update, both Senator Nethercott and I serve on the blockchain task force, and we had some outreach from some attorneys in this regard that thought this might be an area that might be advantageous to us. We didn't take any action on it because there was nothing to do with blockchain and anything they said. So, however, it did sound very advantageous for the state of Wyoming. Senator Nethercott, do you want to take the first stab at this, or you want me to go ahead a little bit? Okay. So committee, one of the aspects that was brought up is that recently in Delaware, there's been some recent cases that suggest judges should consider the interests of common stockholders those would be your founders, employees, and advisors in preference to those of preferred stockholders, typically investors, particularly when the preferred stockholders are to receive most or all of the proceeds of a liquidation event, such as an acquisition. The ideology that's being brought forward is that we would perhaps put something in statute that would state something along the lines that shall be considered equal in regards to a liquidation or something along those lines. And that would be for the purpose, and they specifically warned against, and members, I sent you an email in regards to this that had this individual give kind of a, and his name is Ross Barbarash. He's with Atrium FinTech outfit. And his ideology behind that was, we don't want to put something that would favor the investors, the venture investors or anything like that. We don't want to favor one side or the other, but we do want to keep it near as equitable as possible to protect both shareholders in this regard. And their purpose for stating that is they think that could be advantageous for the state of Wyoming over Delaware in regards to our corporate governance. Senator Nethercott, you want to follow up on that today?
Chairman Lindenholm, you did a great job understanding that issue there. So really, I think the reason why it came to light is this particular individual is aware of the competitive nature that Delaware provides, including within its Chancery Court, and has clearly indicated to us why Delaware continues to be the preferred choice as it relates notably to blockchain for tech companies, and that deals with their venture capitalist rights and their preferred shareholder rights. So based on the recent decisions coming out of the Delaware Chancery Court, he believes that Wyoming could create a competitive space if we chose to take a different approach than the Delaware Chancery Court in order to protect those shareholders. So an interesting point that I think we should research further with an understanding of what those Delaware cases are, what they say, and then how to really address that from a legislative perspective. So I think it's an interesting and exciting topic for us to maybe get the edge on Delaware potentially, but something that warrants more research.
Yep, go ahead, Mr. Chairman.
Just a question to Senator Nethercott, the co-chairman. That's something timeframe wise that we could attempt to accomplish during this interim, or is it something that's going to take longer? I'm kind of interested in seeing what a draft would look like.
Mr. Chairman, I do believe it is. I think if Mr. Meyer and LSO and myself and maybe some other key corporate lawyers take a look at those cases and study them by September, we certainly could have some suggestions.
Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, and let me make a suggestion right now that one of the things we consider is giving the incorporators the ability to specify in the article of incorporation which way they want it, whether there's a preference for the common or the preferred, or some balancing of the rights, how they want to handle that. Because that way you can give them the ability to do it the way they want it, rather than having a hard and fast rule.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Scott is brilliant once again, and I think that's preferred where the incorporators choose their own fates. But in the event they fail to have an operating agreement, like in the case we saw today, that the default would be perhaps as we indicated, future legislation.
Further questions before I move to the Secretary of State's office? If they want to talk about this.
Mr. Chairman, this here this meeting conversation.
Right. That doesn't make you nervous, committee, nothing will. Talk to you. Committee, any questions or comments? Now I'm going to go to public testimony. Really cleared out. Nobody wants to talk about corporate governance with us. Mr. Meyer, do you have any comments in regards to what was stated earlier by myself, Senator Nethercott, or Senator Scott, or Co-Chairman Minot?
Mr. Chairman, no, I do not, and to the extent that anybody would like some help on this, I am more than happy to roll my sleeves and help.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Meyer. We really appreciate that. What are your thoughts about having some kind of statutory language that speaks to equity among shareholders, or the court shall consider equity among shareholders between common and preferred?
Mr. Chairman, my experience has taught me that you might have shareholders that everybody wants to form a company, but at some point in time, they want investors to help with that company, and you have preferred shareholders that may have, in fact, dividend preferences or distribution preferences of some sort to help compensate them for the amount of equity or the capital infusion that they are providing. Those things are usually, in my experience, set out by contract. And so that everybody understands the bylaws are modified, what have you, so that we know exactly how payments are getting out. The typical rub where I find this thing be maybe an issue all of a sudden is that when you have preferred shareholders, they of course want a seat at the table. And they may not have, the majority of the votes, but they have some votes. And if you are at the table as the board of directors and you want to run this thing, the risk will come at the point where if the preferred shareholders are trying to do something that feathers their nest or is beneficial to them, as opposed to what's good for the company. And that's where the breach of fiduciary duty argument comes up, and whether preferred should have as much or more than or less than what common shareholders have. And I think that's going to require a little bit of discussion, because in the sense of trying to say, I want to encourage more businesses to come to Wyoming as opposed to Delaware, and Delaware says now that the Chancery Court has ruled that you can't breach your fiduciary duty. Well, again, there's probably a good reason for that, because I don't want to have investors who want to come to Wyoming, one, getting taken advantage of, but two, know the rules of the game, and that does not allow, the investor to be the tail that wags the dog. And if in fact that comes down, then that again makes me worried that somebody's going to write a nasty article somewhere that how Wyoming allows people to be policed, and that is certainly what we don't want.
Right, and I think to that point, Mr. Meyer, that's what we're effectively seeing out of Delaware right now with some of these tech companies. And for the committee's kind of edification, because this is something that I had to read up on. When a tech company starts up, a group of people form a company and they decide it's going to be great and everything's wonderful until they need investment. And that's, those are your preferred shareholders, or the investors. Those are VCs, those type of folks. So the VCs invest, and then what has happened in Delaware within several of these court cases is the VCs invest, gives the shot in the arm to the company, and the company starts doing extremely well. And as will happen with companies, they're bought out, acquired, so to speak. And the way these court cases have led out is the VCs, or the investors that gave the shot in the arm to that company, were essentially given the short straw by the courts, whereas the common shareholders, the folks that formed the business, or the employees that were given shares in the business, were the ruling the roost, even though while they started the business, they ended up surviving without those other guys. Right. So it's kind of and this is where the equity aspect comes in. So there are numerous entities looking for kind of a safe harbor that will be treated square. And so that's kind of the deal. And since we are courting tech companies nowadays, that might be advantageous to look at. So any further comments for Mr. Meyer, or questions for Mr. Meyer?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, go ahead, Senator Case.
It's kind of more general. So I hear you use the terms common and preferred. I'm not really used to it being used when we're talking about it. I mean, I think it fits that possibility. But so preferred stock typically is, it has some characteristics of a bond. They're paid out first with respect to, typically they're paid a dividend before common. And it may be a smaller dividend, but they're first in line for that. And Mr. Meyer can help me if I think they also have liquidation preferences if the company were actually go under. So they might get whatever money's left or assets left for the common shareholders do. The common shareholders typically have heftier voting rights. And I think preferred under some circumstances don't have any voting rights at all, if I remember right. But you could start a company and have some common stock and some preferred stock. It's not necessarily common is limited to the people that started it up. Although typically, if you want to maintain control of the company, when you start it, you want to be the common stock. You give preferential rights to the preferred stock to get their money into the entity. And some preferred stock, it might be convertible to debt, it might be callable. It's just a little bit more complicated, as I would call it.
Senator, your case, you're absolutely spot on, and that's kind of where we get to the rub with the recent Delaware cases, that they've gone off the normal money trail that has been considered. So liquidation and acquisition, those types of things, those preferred stockholders have always been the first in line because they're the ones that upfronted the money. And now common stockholders are being considered beforehand, and so that's kind of the issue that we're seeing out of California and those types of cases, Delaware to be included. So any further comments or questions, committee? Seeing none, and public testimony is closed. Committee, what's your pleasure? Any pleasure? Senator.
I move we ask Senator Nethercutt to consult with appropriate experts and bring forth legislation that their judgment is worthwhile.
Senator, we have, and a second, Senator Nethercutt, comments?
I shall go forth.
And because both Senator Scott and Senator Nethercutt, and I believe Chairman Landon all refused to turn on the microphones, I'll go ahead and repeat that. So the motion and the second was to have Senator Nethercutt give with interested participants and see if there's some legislation that can be drafted, be brought forward at the September meeting for the committee's review. Any comments or questions on that motion? Seeing none, question being called. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. Motion carries. All right, I think we've done that, Senator Nethercutt, at least 3 times today. I think we did it several times during the blockchain task force. So you've got a busy summer. Yeah, okay, so committee and members of the public that are still with us, we have nothing further on our agenda for the day, so we're going to be moving forward tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock start time. Oh, yeah. Yeah, Mr. Meyer, thank you very much for your input. Really appreciate it. I hope Senator Nethercutt, I'm sure she'll be reaching out to you. Mr. Meyer, thank you.
Thank you. Down.
Thank you. I don't know first. Yeah, is there any general public comment on anything we did or did not do from the public? Director Schoen, did you raise your hand right there? I kind of saw it. Anything from the committee?
Oh, that was a fun day.
Senator Case thinks it was a fun day. He's got a weird life. You need to think about those choices. Senator Nethercutt?
I was here on time and we're ending.
Senator Nethercutt, once again, your microphone is on. Okay. On purpose. All right, seeing no further comment from the committee or the public, thanks for attending, everybody. We'll see you at 8 o'clock. We're adjourned. Or in recess until